Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lizzie Marriott. In the fall of 2012, Lizzie Marriott began her studies in marine biology at the University of New Hampshire. To reduce her living expenses, she moved out of her family home in Massachusetts, where she lived with her parents, Bob and Melissa Lizzie, and relocated to Chester to live with her aunt and uncle, Tony and Becky Hannah. Lizzie quickly became a beloved member of her aunt and uncle's family. She had a passion for marine animals, which led her to pursue a degree in marine biology. Although she was now 2 hours away from her parents, they remained close and kept in regular contact. Lizzie was known for her kind, gentle, and sweet nature, which made her a favorite among those who knew her. Lizzie's aunt recalled that whenever Lizzie came home, she'd exclaim, "I'm home," and it filled their hearts with joy. Lizzie was thriving in her new life, with new opportunities opening up in her free time. She had found a job at Target, where she quickly fit in and earned respect from her colleagues. That's where she met Kate McDonough, an 18-year-old who quickly became a close friend. They girls often hung out after work, and one day, Kate invited Lizzie over to her apartment. On subsequent invitations, Lizzie was happy to accept. Lizzie and Kate planned a cozy evening with dinner and a movie on October 9th. However, Kate's boyfriend Seth joined them, bringing a lively atmosphere. Seth was a man of many talents, with a theater arts background and a black belt in karate. Lizzie's family and friends expected a fun evening together. When she failed to return home at the agreed-upon time, her relatives initially thought she might have stayed overnight at a friend's place and then headed to university. However, when she didn't show up the next day, her aunt and uncle grew concerned and contacted her parents, who were also unaware of her whereabouts. Lizzie's parents immediately drove to Chester, reporting their daughter's disappearance to the police along the way. The investigation began, and the police questioned everyone who knew Lizzie, but her relatives had no idea where she had gone. Fortunately, a friend named Nate revealed that he thought Lizzie might be with Kate McDonough. Nate asked Kate if she had seen Lizzie. Kate replied that she hadn't. Detectives began investigating the new information provided by Nate. In the meantime, they discovered that her bank accounts showed no activity and her phone was dead. This led them to rule out the initial theory that she might have been involved in an accident. Shortly after, her car was located. After interviewing her friends and co-workers, investigators gathered some information about Kate and her boyfriend, Seth. Lizzie and Kate's acquaintances have noticed they spending increasing amounts of time together, despite their vastly different personalities. Outwardly, Lizzie is sociable and compassionate, whereas Kate is known for being rude. The reason behind their close relationship remains unclear. Lizzie was once a cheerful person, but after meeting Seth, she changed. Her co-workers noticed a difference, and she distanced herself from relatives who disapproved of Seth's behavior. They started dating when Lizzie was 17 and moved in together in Dover, New Hampshire, after she turned 18. On October 12th, authorities questioned Kate and Seth separately, but at the same time. This tactic helped investigators gather more information. For 2 hours, Kate consistently denied ever having met Lizzie on October 9th, but then she stopped cooperating completely with the investigation. Seth, on the other hand, was more open with the details. He contradicted Kate's account, saying that Lizzie was actually at their place on the 9th. Seth described the events of that day, saying that he, Kate and Lizzie watched a movie together, played strip poker and then engaged in a consensual threesome. However, the situation becomes tragic when things don't go as planned. Lizzie accidentally dies while tied with rope. Too shocked and afraid of being misunderstood, Seth and Kate decided to dump Lizzie's body into the Piscataqua River on Pierce Island. After being questioned for 11 hours, Seth accompanied police to the location and reenacted how he and Kate threw the body off the cliff. Lizzie's parents doubted Seth's account of her death, insisting she was in a loving relationship with Brittany and wouldn't cheat or take her own life. They urged police to find her body for a proper burial. The search continued with volunteers and a detective, but strong river currents made it possible her body was swept to the Atlantic. The investigation into Lizzie's death continued with a search of Seth's apartment. Detectives found the apartment cluttered and disorganized, with evidence of Seth's interest in occultism and black magic. A search of the surrounding area turned up a bag in a trash container containing black leather gloves, a sweatshirt, and men's underwear with DNA from both Seth and Lizzie, confirming their intimate relationship. The sweatshirt was identified as Lizzie's by her family. Later, Kate McDonough confirmed some of his account. According to Kate, she, Seth, and Lizzie spent the evening of October 9th watching a movie and playing strip poker, which eventually led to a consensual intimate encounter involving rope bondage, which Lizzie had agreed to. Lizzie Marriott was having a good time until she suddenly had a seizure, suffocated, and lost consciousness. She stopped breathing when Seth and Kate lifted her up. Kate thought it was an accident, but an unexpected witness's testimony took the investigation in a new direction. A young woman visited the police station, claiming to have crucial information about the Lizzie Marriott case and requesting to speak with the lead detectives. During the conversation, she introduced herself as Catherine Fish, Seth Mella's ex-girlfriend. Her statements implied that Seth was capable of murder. She revealed that Seth had once confided in her about a fantasy in which he took someone's life. To understand Catherine's testimony, it's essential to examine her past relationship with Seth. They met 10 years ago, and initially, Seth seemed attentive and caring. However, during their first intimate encounter, Catherine discovered Seth's interest in BDSM. Seth initially seemed great, but he revealed a cruel and controlling side over time. He didn't tolerate disagreement or boundaries. After sharing dark fantasies, Kinda felt trapped and scared, especially when Seth physically attacked her, grabbing her throat and refusing to let go despite her pleas. This incident shattered her illusions about their relationship. After moving to a new city, Kinda felt isolated and alone, dependent on Seth. As his behavior escalated, he introduced other women, proposing a polyamorous relationship. Kinda felt trapped, afraid to leave due to Seth's controlling behavior. It took months for her to gather the courage to escape the toxic relationship. In May 2014, Seth Mella appeared in court, facing not only intentional murder charges but also accusations of taking advantage of multiple individuals. Several people testified against him, including Kate McDonough. 2 months after Lizzie's death, Kate was arrested and held in custody on charges of obstructing justice and interfering with the investigation. During her time in custody, Kate had ample opportunity to reflect on the events and consider who she was protecting. While imprisoned, Kate and Seth stayed in close touch and envisioned a life together in a country where they could not be extradited. They shared dreams of getting married, starting a family, and building a future, but their escape plan stalled in the winter of 2012. Seth convinced his cellmate, Ryan Bachman, who was about to be released, to help their escape. The plan was for Ryan to use his bank account to withdraw money, buy drugs, and sell them to increase their initial investment. They intended to use the money to purchase guns, 2 cars, explosives, and a boat. Ryan had different intentions and chose to keep the money for himself, causing Seth to give up on their plan to escape. Meanwhile, authorities became aware of their scheme. Seth wrote to Kate and hinted at a reunion in the afterlife, suggesting he believed in its existence. This could imply that Seth was vaguely suggesting Kate should consider ending her life to join him in the afterlife. As time passed, Kate's thoughts became clearer, allowing her to make a more rational decision when the prosecutor's office presented her with a favorable deal in 2014. Under the agreement, Kate was required to reveal the truth about the events that occurred on the evening of October 9th, and in return, her potential 20-year prison sentence was significantly reduced to 3 years. This offer was especially beneficial in light of the circumstances that later came to light during the investigation. As part of their agreement, Kate acknowledged that she was deeply intimidated by Seth and followed his instructions without hesitation. Over time, Seth had slowly stripped Kate of her autonomy and stifled her ability to make decisions for herself. Approximately 6 weeks before the tragic event, Seth had asked Kate to arrange a threesome with someone else while she was away on a 10-day theater tour, but Kate was unable to find someone to participate. Over time, Seth's messages to Kate became increasingly aggressive, transitioning from giving her instructions to making threats. He warned her of severe consequences if she didn't meet his demands, which included bringing a friend to participate in his plan. Kate invited Lizzie to visit her at home, and Lizzie agreed because she trusted Kate and had been to her place before. However, Kate didn't tell Lizzie that Seth would also be there, as she knew Lizzie might be hesitant. Seth had seen Lizzie's photos and was eager to meet her. On October 9th, Seth arrived at Kate's apartment at 9 p.m. At first, Kate and Lizzie chatted together, and Seth joined in later, initially creating a light-hearted atmosphere with his jokes and friendly demeanor. As they watched a movie, Seth suggested playing strip poker, dimming the lights to create an intimate setting. Lizzie began to lose the game, eventually ending up in her underwear. In another round, Seth suggested kissing Kate, but she refused, explaining that she was in a committed relationship and found the idea unpleasant. Seth suggested leaving Lizzie alone, but she refused. He retrieved a rope and gloves from his room, returned, and strangled her with the rope before she could react. After killing Lizzie, Seth committed a further act of violence against her body. His girlfriend, Kate, was present but did not intervene, claiming she was too scared to act. She feared that she would become the next victim if she tried to help. Later, at around 1 a.m., Seth and his girlfriend wrapped Lizzie's body in tarpaulin and placed it in a suitcase. They then transported the suitcase to Lizzie's car and drove to Pierce Island by the river. From the observation deck, they removed Lizzie's body from the suitcase and threw it off the cliff. After the incident, Kate and another person cleaned up inside her car. Then they drove to the campus parking lot, where Kate parked her vehicle. From the parking lot, they walked a 10-mile distance to Kate's home. The experience left Kate severely shaken, and she went into shock. She was also fearful of testifying against Seth in the future, worrying that he might intimidate or silence her due to concerns for her safety. During the trial, Kate's excessive sobbing raised suspicions, with some doubting her emotional display and suggesting she was a skilled actress. Kate's defense claimed that Lizzie's death was an accident during intimacy, but acknowledged that Seth and Kate had disposed of the body. They alleged that Seth isolated and coerced Kate, affecting her mental state. The prosecution focused on deliberate murder, citing the discovery of gloves at the scene, which suggested premeditation. Roberta Gherkin and Paul Hickok, acquaintances of Seth Mella, testified for the prosecution. After Lizzie's murder, Seth called them at 10:49 p.m. asking for help. When they arrived after 11 p.m., they found Seth on the bed next to Kate McDonough in lingerie. Seth said, "This time things went too far." Roberta found Kate in the kitchen and suggested calling an ambulance. They chose not to intervene or contact police, avoiding involvement. Seth Mella was convicted of first-degree murder by strangulation and conspiracy in 2014, receiving a life sentence without parole. Kate McDonough, who was 20 at the time, got a 3-year sentence as part of a plea deal and was released in 2016. She has since maintained a low profile. Lizzie Marriott's parents, Bob and Melissa, do not feel the sentence is sufficient. They hope her case can serve as a warning to others, especially women. They created a memorial bench in her hometown since her body was never recovered. The case of Michael Redlick. Danielle was born in 1976 in Florida. Her family later moved to Cleveland, Ohio. She grew up kind and well-mannered with a creative nature. Danielle was the eldest child and appreciated beauty from a young age. She attended Valencia College and later enrolled in the psychology department at Baldwin Wallace University in 1996. Her mother, Caitlin Aquino, remarried with Michael but passed away from cancer after a short 2-year marriage. Caitlin, battling breast cancer, received high-quality care due to her Michael's insurance. They formally married for medical benefits, but the treatment was unsuccessful. After her death, her husband, Michael Redlick, raised their children alone. At 22, Danielle, the eldest daughter, returned home to help, bringing her brother and sister with her to live with Michael. Danielle later made the unexpected decision to marry her stepfather, Michael. Started as a friend in 2019. Danielle cared for the younger kids and worked at a bar at night, while Michael built his sports recruitment career. He became attached to the children and felt comfortable with Danielle, who saw him as a dependable support despite their 20-year age difference. Their easy and natural interaction gradually brought them closer together. Danielle initially kept her relationship with Michael hidden from her family. With Michael, she felt loved and protected. He found her a job at an advertising agency, had a high income, and devoted time to the family. Things were going well for both. When Michael received a job offer to become the Memphis Grizzlies vice president, he asked Danielle to move with him, but she hesitated. Danielle declined to join Michael due to her studies and familiar lifestyle, but they continued their long-distance relationship. One day, Michael showed her a cottage he bought for them by the Mississippi River, impressing her with its picturesque location. She eventually moved in, and Michael found her a job in radio. Initially, everything was perfect, but Michael's job later brought changes. Michael's new position brought increased stress and tension with management. He became stressed and tired, often unwinding with alcohol, which became a daily habit. He'd return home late, intoxicated, and angry. Danielle tried to support him, but his promises to stop were short-lived. After missing a planned dinner, tension between them grew. Danielle was upset, saying if he couldn't make time for her, he should have warned her. Danielle made a joke, which struck a nerve with Michael, and he slapped her across the face, causing her to stagger back. Her clothes and the floor were bloodied. In shock, she recoiled as Michael cried and apologized. He took her to a sports doctor, who provided first aid and recommended seeing a dentist and plastic surgeon due to the severity of her injuries, including a chipped front tooth. The next day, Michael made amends with a thoughtful dinner, showering his wife with attention and care. Despite the previous day's incident, she forgave him and chose not to report it, aware of the strict domestic violence laws in their state. This wasn't the first warning sign, however. Danielle had already experienced similar behavior from Michael before the incident. In 2003, Michael and Danielle had a daughter named Jaden. A year later, they decided to formalize their relationship. Life was going well for them, but Michael still faced obstacles at work due to a change in management, which prevented him from getting a long-awaited promotion. 7 years later, their son Sawyer was born, and both of two devoted themselves to raising their children. However, Michael's work struggles and added responsibilities took a toll on him, triggering a return to drinking and more frequent conflicts with Danielle. Michael's behavior finally reached a boiling point during an argument in which he physically attacked Danielle, grabbing her by the throat and holding her against the wall. The incident was incredibly frightening for Danielle. She realized she could no longer tolerate Michael's rough behavior and made the difficult decision to leave him, taking the children with her. Danielle moved in with her relatives, who had initially been skeptical of her marriage to Michael but had grown to accept it over time. In an attempt to win her back, Michael visited Danielle multiple times, apologized for his actions, and asked her to return home. After a period of separation, they eventually reconciled and restored their relationship. The years following were marked by uncertainty. The Redlick family relocated to California for 5 years, but struggled with Michael's drinking habit. After losing their jobs, they relied on savings until moving to Indiana in 2014, seeking a fresh start and stability. Michael moved first, while Danielle stayed behind in California with the children. They needed time to sell their old home and belongings, a process that took a year. The constant relocating had taken a toll on the family, especially the children, who struggled to adapt to their new surroundings. Meanwhile, the family's financial situation improved, but the distance between Danielle and Michael began to affect their marriage. They grew apart, communicating less and less, as the infrequent visits took a strain on their relationship. Danielle and Michael faced new challenges after reuniting. Danielle noticed Michael's emotional distance and dwindling romantic connection. In reality, Michael was struggling with personal issues related to age and health, affecting his intimate life. He confessed his struggles to Danielle, fearing rejection, but she responded with empathy and reassured him of her support. After trying various medications, they decided to try hormone injections. With the testosterone injections, Michael experienced a resurgence in his physical and mental health. He regained the energy and vitality of his younger years. However, this newfound energy also led to increased aggression. One evening, while Danielle was brushing her teeth, Michael attacked her in the bathroom. His reasoning for this violent outburst was that she had failed to wake him up when she went to rest the previous evening. Danielle was fed up with the situation and decided to leave. However, this only infuriated her husband, who then choked her. Danielle was unable to defend herself and started to lose consciousness. She felt like she was on the verge of death. When she eventually came to, she saw her husband standing over her, looking scared and confused, and begging for forgiveness. All Danielle could manage to do was to silently crawl away from him. Following this incident, they continued to live together in the same house and raise their children, but their relationship was irreparably altered. Apparently, the situation at home had reached a breaking point. Michael's drinking problem worsened, leading to more frequent arguments over small issues. These disputes often turned violent, causing stress and fear for the family. Despite her unhappiness and resentment, she remained in the relationship, still deeply loving her husband. Their daughter Danielle also suffered, becoming anxious and withdrawn. She took up photography as a hobby to distract herself from her troubles. Despite their issues, the Redlick family appeared to be a respectable family to outsiders, as they generally kept their disagreements private. By the end of 2014, the family had finally settled in Florida. Around this time, Michael decided to change careers, seeking a less stressful profession. He started working as the Director of External Affairs and Partnership Programs at the University of Central Florida and also began teaching. Although Michael's post-MBA career income was lower, the job provided him with a sense of fulfillment and stability. The family initially rented a home in Winter Park, but eventually purchased a large, Mediterranean-style house in the area. The house had a unique feature, an attic floor that Danielle claimed as her own private retreat, often retreating there on nights when Michael's anger issues flared up. As Michael received testosterone injections, their intimate life briefly improved, but even in these moments, he could be emotionally harsh. Their relationship remained strained, and Danielle turned to alcohol to cope. With Michael working and providing for the family, Danielle managed the household and children, but her dependency worsened, and she became increasingly withdrawn. The frequent arguments eventually led to their separation in 2016. Despite Michael's controlling behavior, Danielle continued to allow him to see the children and provide financial support. As Danielle began working at a school, she started to regain her independence with the help of new friends. They helped her overcome her depression, but she still maintained a relationship with Michael, giving him unrestricted access to her life. This arrangement ultimately led to another violent argument, resulting in Danielle's hospitalization with a concussion. Fearing repercussions for Michael, she kept quiet about the incident. However, on this occasion, Michael took Danielle's silence as a sign that she would continue to tolerate his behavior. When questioned, Danielle revealed a shocking incident that had occurred in early October 2016. Michael had attempted to run her over with his car, but she narrowly escaped by jumping into the bushes. This incident prompted Danielle to visit the police department, but when detectives started asking detailed questions, she became hesitant and left without filing a report. The reason for their initial separation was the same as before, but they eventually reconciled and returned to their shared home. However, this decision ultimately proved disastrous for both of them. On January 12, 2019, at approximately 9 a.m., a 911 call was placed. During the call, a woman identifying herself as Danielle Redlick reported that her husband, Michael, had suffered a fatal heart attack. When the rescue service arrived, they noticed a strong smell of cleaning agent and a bucket of pink-colored water at the entrance to the living room. Michael lay on the floor in a pool of blood, lifeless, with a penetrating knife wound. Michelle, who made the call, had cuts on her wrists and was taken to the hospital after receiving first aid. The police investigation revealed that Michael Redlick's life had been taken, and forensic analysis confirmed the blood traces belonged to the deceased. The pink liquid was diluted blood, and someone had tried to erase a trail from the bedroom to the living room. Despite cleaning efforts, blood spatter was found on walls and corners, and a large knife was discovered at the kitchen entrance, with 3 smaller knives in the sink. Detectives questioned Danielle after her injuries were deemed non-life-threatening. She changed her story multiple times, initially claiming her husband died of heart disease, then saying he took his own life after an argument. Experts disputed this, citing the difficulty of self-inflicting such a wound and the usual preference for simpler methods. The autopsy revealed Michael died from blood loss, which could have been prevented with timely medical help. He also had a lacerated eye and high levels of alcohol in his system. An investigation found that Michael and Danielle had an argument days before the incident, witnessed by their daughter Jaden. Michael had been drinking and burst into the bathroom where Danielle was hiding, but Jaden intervened and took the bottle away. Danielle left the house and returned after Michael fell asleep. Jaden said it was the first time she'd seen her father so angry, but he apologized multiple times and was normally a loving father. The next day, they reconciled and attended a soccer game, but Danielle appeared upset and barely spoke. That evening, Danielle and her husband dropped off their kids at a friend's house for a sleepover, leaving them alone for the night. Later, Danielle stopped by McDonald's to pick up dinner and returned home around 10:30 p.m. When she arrived, she found her husband intoxicated. During dinner, Danielle received a text message from an unknown number. Her husband saw the message, became enraged, and physically attacked her, attempting to strangle her. In an effort to defend herself, Danielle grabbed a nearby knife and stabbed her husband in the chest. He fell to the ground, bleeding heavily. Danielle claimed that she immediately called for emergency assistance, but accidentally dialed the wrong number. An investigation later confirmed her account of events. Danielle explained that she lied to the 911 operator and during interrogation because she was afraid of not being believed that she had acted in self-defense. This fear was partly due to prior incidents that had damaged her credibility with authorities. She had recently been involved in a physical altercation with friends and had also resisted arrest when police arrived at the scene of the incident, even attempting to bite an officer. Her uncooperative behavior during the investigation led to charges of disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. As a result, she worried that her claims of self-defense would be met with skepticism. Danielle was on probation for about a year. The cuts on her wrists were self-inflicted but superficial, leading investigators to doubt her claim of trying to end her life due to emotional turmoil. They also found she wasn't a role model, because she having signed up on a dating site and being unfaithful after learning of Michael's infidelity. Analysis of messages between Michael and Danielle showed she still loved him, but felt betrayed and disillusioned after learning of his affairs and plans to leave her. She was heartbroken, feeling he didn't appreciate her dedication. The prosecution used this against her. The prosecutor claimed the crime was premeditated in a fit of rage due to Michael's infidelity and impending divorce. Neighbors confirmed their loud arguments often turned physical. While Michael was described as kind and helpful, Danielle was seen as quarrelsome. Video evidence showed her acting irrationally and attacking others. Danielle's lawyer claimed her actions were self-defense due to a history of emotional and physical abuse by Michael. Relatives confirmed he was rough and emotionally abusive, frequently humiliating her, although never in their presence. They also noted Danielle became nervous and quick-tempered after years of marriage, but a relative recalled calling her crazy. The prosecution claims Danielle deliberately left her husband to die, indicating she was waiting for him to pass away. They found she used a dating app on the night of the incident, suggesting premeditation driven by hatred and financial gain. Danielle stood to lose a portion of their shared wealth after the divorce. Her net worth was $1.2 million at the time of Michael's death. She had repeatedly changed her statements, possibly to confuse the investigation and tamper with evidence. The defense claimed Michael was a manipulator who preyed on his stepdaughter after his first wife's death. Despite a plea deal offering a 10-year sentence for manslaughter, the defendant insisted on her innocence, risking a life sentence for first or second-degree murder. The jury delivered a verdict on July 17, 2022, finding Danielle Redlick not guilty of premeditated murder, but guilty of tampering with evidence. She received a 5-year suspended sentence, which was reduced to 2 years due to time served. The case of Rachel Anderson. Rachel Anderson was born on January 28, 1994, in Warren, Ohio, to parents William, Bill, Rachel, and Patricia, Trish, Rachel. She grew up with a younger brother, John, with whom she shared a close family bond. Rachel graduated from Warren Harding High School in 2012, where she excelled academically as a member of the National Honor Society. She was also an active athlete, participating in soccer and volleyball. Despite the unconventional nature of her career aspirations, Rachel had always dreamed of becoming a funeral director since childhood. This passion led her to pursue a degree in mortuary science at Youngstown State University. Her hard work and dedication earned her recognition as one of the top students in her field and secured a scholarship. Following her undergraduate studies, Rachel enrolled in the Cincinnati College of Mortuary Science, graduating in 2016 with a Bachelor of Science in Mortuary Science. She became a member of the Ohio Funeral Directors Association and moved to Columbus, where she completed an internship at Shaw Davis Funeral Home. Rachel approached her work with great respect and saw it as her duty to support and care for families during difficult times. Rachel's internship was nearing its end, and she had high hopes of becoming a permanent employee at the Bureau. On January 26th, Rachel Anderson celebrated her 24th birthday. The next day, her brother John visited her from Warren. Before he left to return home on January 28th, Rachel gave him the key to her apartment. However, John accidentally took the key with him when he left. Later that day, Rachel realized she had misplaced her key and contacted John Kennedy, who had a spare, to arrange a pickup. After speaking with her mother around 6:30 p.m., Rachel retrieved her key from Kennedy. Since her apartment door could only be locked from the outside with a key, she had to leave it unlocked. Rachel stopped for dinner at her favorite restaurant and arrived home around 7:30 p.m. As she entered her apartment, she was confronted by a man who was waiting for her. He abducted her, taking her to the top floor of the building, where he restrained her using various objects. The man bound Rachel's feet and ankles with a hair dryer cord, tied her hands with a belt and blinds cords, and used a curling iron cord to restrain her wrists. He also gagged her to silence her. A man then forced Rachel to reveal her PIN numbers and subjected her to torture, abuse, and physical harm. Ultimately, he strangled her with a cord from an electric blanket, causing blunt force trauma, and the stab wound to her head. After the attack, the man hid Rachel's body in a closet, leaving her partially naked with the electric blanket cord still tied around her neck. He then stole her car and used her bank cards to make purchases at several stores in Columbus. Forensic evidence revealed that bruising and red marks on Rachel's ankles and wrists suggested she was alive when the perpetrator restrained her. A DNA sample was discovered on the rope used to tie her up and on Rachel's body. The coroner's autopsy report concluded that Rachel's death was caused by a stab wound to the head and neck, contradicting the initial theory of strangulation. After interviewing Rachel's co-workers and her ex-boyfriend, who had an alibi, detectives explored alternative explanations for the attack. They returned to Rachel's apartment to search for clues, hoping to identify the perpetrator. During this search, they found Rachel's purse, which was missing her wallet, on the living room floor. 2 weeks later, Rachel's mother discovered the 9-inch steak knife used in the stabbing in a box in the apartment. Detectives initially thought the crime was a robbery, but the brutality and torture inflicted on Rachel suggested that the perpetrator was not just a thief, but a skilled and sadistic individual who took pleasure in exerting power over his victim. The investigators considered various motives, but had no suspects and kept the investigation details secret to avoid compromising the case. Later, DNA samples were found on Rachel's body and at the crime scene, but unfortunately, they did not match anyone in the Special Services database. Fortunately, a surveillance video showed 2 people using Rachel's car to drive around the city after her death, and cash was withdrawn from her debit and credit cards. An investigation revealed a crucial lead when a phone number linked to the night of January 28, 2018, at Rachel's apartment was identified. Location data analysis led authorities to the suspect. Anthony Perrin, a 54-year-old convicted offender, was arrested. He had spent 33 years in prison for violent crimes, including rape, robbery, kidnapping, and attempted murder. Anthony Perrin had a turbulent past, beginning with his upbringing by grandparents, then living with his mother. Mental health diagnoses, including conduct disorder and antisocial personality disorder, indicated serious social problems. He entered a youth commission facility at age 14, then transitioned into foster care. At 15, Anthony faced his first charge in 1980 for abusing a young foster brother he babysat. A year later, he threatened his girlfriend's mother with a knife and attempted to drown her before fleeing. In 1982, Anthony Perrin was convicted of crimes in Franklin at 17 and served 24 years. After release in 2006, he moved to Georgia, was charged with forgery in 2007, and spent 9 more years in prison. Released in 2017, he returned to Ohio, required to check in with the sheriff's department every 90 days. On August 21, 2017, Anthony was caught with a woman in his car. 6 days later, he was stopped for driving without a license and found with a knife and shotgun, but wasn't arrested. Later, CCTV footage showed Rachel's car outside a store, with a man getting out of the passenger side. The driver wasn't visible, but police identified the man as Anthony Slits. He was questioned and revealed he was approached by a man who offered him money to cash in his ex-girlfriend's cards. Slits confirmed Anthony's identity and outlined their route on January 28, 2018, when they tried to cash out Rachel's stolen cards. Anthony Perrin remained at large until his capture on February 9, 2018, when he was taken into custody following a multi-day stakeout of his sister's home. Anthony was charged with multiple counts of serious crimes, including burglary, robbery, kidnapping, rape, and murder. Nearly 2 years later, his trial began on February 4, 2020, and 4 witnesses testified on the first day, including Rachel's co-worker Jonathan Kennedy, who was the person who found Rachel. The trial continued with testimony from Jonathan and the manager of the apartment complex where the crime occurred. Officer Frank Ghani, who was parked outside the apartment when the body was discovered, also testified and shared the surveillance footage with the jury. On the same day, Anthony expressed dissatisfaction with his attorneys to the judge and requested new representation. However, it became apparent that Anthony was intentionally delaying the proceedings. The prosecution presented expert witnesses on February 10th, including a latent print expert, who explained how technology was used to track the use of Rachel Anderson's debit card and its connection to the crime scene. The defendant's sister also testified, revealing that her brother had given her the debit card, claiming it belonged to his girlfriend. However, after watching news reports, she discovered that the card actually belonged to Rachel. The final day of testimony was February 11th. The medical examiner testified that the defendant's DNA was found at the crime scene. Additionally, a forensic pathologist and a deputy coroner from the Franklin County office provided details about the extent of Rachel Anderson's injuries. During the final hearing on February 12th, Assistant Prosecutor Amy Van Killen presented the state's closing argument, outlining the events of the crime and asserting that Anthony had murdered Rachel Anderson in cold blood. In contrast, defense attorney Larry Thomas acknowledged that Anthony had used Rachel's cards, but argued that he was not responsible for the crime. The defense attorney argued that the prosecution's case lacked concrete evidence, as the DNA and cell phone data did not definitively link Anthony Perrin to the crime. However, after deliberating for approximately 6 hours over 2 days, the jury of 4 men and 8 women found him guilty on all counts. The prosecution pursued the death penalty due to the severity of the crime, which involved the murder of Rachel Anderson during an aggravated burglary. Additionally, Anthony's prior conviction for a similar attempted murder of a woman weighed against him. Prosecutor Bryan stated that some individuals consistently disregard the law, and Anthony Perrin is a prime example. The sentencing phase of the trial began on February 18th. In an attempt to mitigate the sentence, the defense presented evidence of Anthony's troubled childhood, but the prosecution counter-argued that the aggravating circumstances of the case outweighed any mitigating factors. During the trial, it was established that Anthony Perrin was fully aware of his actions when he attacked Rachel. Despite this, several people testified on his behalf, including his mother, sister, a psychologist, and a former teacher. Anthony also addressed the jury, sharing a 13-minute unscripted statement about his troubled past, including an abusive childhood and difficulties after being released from prison. In his statement, Anthony described feeling helpless and claimed that the system had failed him. He blamed the justice system for his current situation but did not directly address the crime or apologize for it. After deliberating for 3.5 hours, the jury was unable to agree on the death penalty and instead recommended life in prison without parole. The sentencing took place on March 16, 2020. Rachel's mother was visibly emotional in court as the verdict was announced. Rachel's father also spoke, expressing his surprise at how Anthony, a repeat offender with a history of violence, was able to make demands and become hysterical during the investigation. The case of Rachel Anderson's murder drew to a close as Anthony Perrin's sentence was handed down. However, what stood out was not the severity of the sentence, but rather the disturbing behavior of one individual, Anthony Perrin himself. As an adult, he shifted the blame away from himself and onto the system, denying any personal responsibility for his heinous actions. Despite his efforts to deflect blame, Anthony received 2 consecutive life sentences without parole, one for aggravated murder and another for violent crimes. In addition, he was given 63 more years for other crimes including burglary, kidnapping, robbery, and various violent offenses. This marked a total sentence of multiple consecutive life terms plus 63 years. The case of Jennifer Brown. Jennifer Brown was born in 1979, radiated positivity and warmth, impacting those around her. Her numerous pursuits often left friends and family wondering how she managed it all, but her true passion was being a mother. Despite having to care for Noah, her son, this has not negatively affected her life. Instead, make Jennifer stronger, especially after Noah was diagnosed with autism as a child. As she cared for Noah, Jennifer became his rock and closest friend. They spent countless hours together, sharing joyful moments and supporting each other through life's challenges. Their heartwarming bond evoked feelings of tenderness and admiration from those who knew them. The small town adored this family for their genuine kindness and cheerful nature. Tragedy struck unexpectedly on January 3, 2023, when Jennifer vanished without leaving behind any clues. On January 4, 2023, Antonio Blair Watts Richardson contacted the Limerick Township Police Department, deeply concerned about his close friend Jennifer's disappearance. Although it had been less than 24 hours since he last saw or heard from her, Antonio's anxiety was growing by the minute. Despite numerous attempts, he couldn't reach Jennifer, which was unusual since she was always responsive, especially when it came to her son Noah. Jennifer's family and friends knew her as a devoted mother and caring person, making her sudden disappearance alarming. Antonio's call to the police initiated a lengthy and mysterious investigation. A massive search effort began, involving police officers, family, and friends, all hoping to find clues about Jennifer's disappearance. The main question on everyone's mind was what could have caused Jennifer to leave her son without explanation. At 4 p.m., Officer Stephen Crawford from the Limerick Township Police Department visited the Brown family home to check on the situation. He observed Jennifer's vehicle parked near the porch. Upon entering the house, he found her keys, purse, tablet, and work cell phone still inside. However, Jennifer's personal cell phone was nowhere to be found. When police attempted to track the phone, they discovered it had been turned off at 7 a.m. on January 4th, and the signal couldn't be traced after that. The last known location of the phone was near the intersection of Lewis Road and Ridge Pike in Limerick. This discovery marked the first significant lead in the investigation and indicated that something ominous had occurred. As a result, Jennifer was officially reported missing, and the police launched an investigation. Investigators questioned Jennifer's family, friends, and neighbors, but none of them had any information about her disappearance. Her loved ones, including her Aunt Diane Brem and Jennifer's friends Tiffany Barron and Antonio, were adamant that Jennifer would never leave her son behind. As a devoted mother, she would never abandon her child. Despite efforts, no leads were found in Jennifer's disappearance. Her family appealed to the public and a reward was offered for information, but yielded nothing, leaving unanswered questions and growing anxiety. The police investigation started by examining the events of that day, focusing on Jennifer's close friend Antonio, who was the last person to see her alive. On what seemed like an ordinary January day, Jennifer and Antonio spent time in the living room discussing life, future plans, and their children. As their kids often played together, Jennifer asked Antonio to pick up her son Noah from school. Antonio agreed and headed to the school to get Noah. The next day, however, Noah's behavior at school raised concerns among his teachers. They noticed that he had missed 2 doses of his medication, which was unusual given Jennifer's diligent care for her son's condition. She always kept his teachers informed about his health and any issues that arose at school. The school staff became concerned when they couldn't reach Jennifer. Noah told them Jennifer had gone to the grocery store but hadn't returned. She would never leave her son alone at this time. Antonio also tried to contact her but was unsuccessful. Antonio reported her missing to the police. As the investigation continued, no new information about Jennifer's whereabouts emerged. Hope for her return began to fade with each passing day. It seemed she had vanished without a trace and might never be found. However, on January 18th, 2 weeks after her disappearance was reported, 2 warehouse employees in nearby Limmer Township stumbled upon something unusual. They exited the building to grab coffee and stumbled upon what seemed to be a freshly dug hole. Upon closer inspection, they were shocked to find a woman's body buried in a shallow grave. The workers immediately notified the police, who promptly arrived at the scene. The body was identified as Jennifer Brown, who had been missing for 2 weeks. The sheriff informed Jennifer's family that her body had been found partially buried near a warehouse in Rosefort. An autopsy revealed that Jennifer's death was caused by asphyxiation, with 3 broken ribs indicating a violent struggle with her killer. The investigation shifted from a missing person case to a murder case. Police re-interviewed Jennifer's family and friends, but these conversations yielded no new leads. The investigation seemed to be reaching a dead end, with no suspects in sight. However, just when detectives thought they had hit a roadblock, an unexpected lead emerged from an unforeseen source. After Jennifer's disappearance and murder were made public, the police asked anyone with relevant information to come forward. Noah's teacher responded to this request. She remembered an incident that initially seemed insignificant but raised serious concerns after Jennifer's death. The teacher reported that Noah shared an important detail about the day Jennifer disappeared. Noah told his teacher that when Antonio picked him up from the bus stop on January 3rd, he saw his mom's personal cell phone among Antonio's belongings. Noah recognized the phone because the lock screen showed his own childhood photo. This information proved crucial in the investigation into Jennifer's murder. Previously, investigators suspected that Jennifer's killer had taken her phone. Now, Antonio became the main suspect. The police started investigating the relationship between Jennifer and Antonio, uncovering surprising details. Initially, Jennifer and Antonio's friendship appeared strong and enduring. They spent a significant amount of time together, were well acquainted, and their families socialized with one another. However, once the financial dealings between them became known, one that had been concealed behind their seemingly friendly relationship. Antonio owned a restaurant called Bird's Kitchen, which had declined and closed in early 2022. Following this, Antonio sought help from Jennifer in August 2022. To support her friend, Jennifer decided to invest in Antonio's business, helping him reopen Bird's Kitchen in a new location. They signed a contract that required Jennifer to provide regular financial support to sustain the restaurant, making payments approximately every 6 weeks. To rebuild Bird's Kitchen, Jennifer gave Antonio approximately $36,000 from August to January. They agreed she would give him another $99,000. Antonio was supposed to find a new location, pay rent, sign a contract, and reopen the restaurant in January 2023. However, Antonio spent the money on personal needs instead of the business. As a result, the property owners canceled their agreement with him on December 26, 2022, because he failed to meet his financial obligations. This left Antonio in a difficult situation, losing both money and the opportunity to open the restaurant. The police suspected Antonio of committing a crime to save his business due to his desperate situation. Upon investigating Jennifer's iPad, they found 2 unauthorized transfers of $177,000 to Bird's Kitchen on January 3rd. These transfers were not part of the agreement between Jennifer and Antonio, and they initially failed due to 2-factor authentication, which was later disabled. This evidence increasingly implicated Antonio in her murder. Police interviewed the owners of the property where Antonio lived, who had recently terminated his lease. Surprisingly, on January 4th, the same day Antonio reported Jennifer missing, he had met with them, claiming he had the money to sign a new lease. This led investigators to believe that Antonio was likely the killer, but they knew he would not confess easily. They needed concrete evidence to prove his guilt. To gather more information, investigators spoke with Antonio's wife, Tiara Taylor. They asked her about Antonio's whereabouts on the day Jennifer went missing. Tiara told them that Antonio had visited the Brown family at around 1 p.m. on January 3rd and didn't return home until 4:30 a.m. the next morning, when he picked up Noah from the bus stop. She also mentioned that Antonio came home briefly, then left again around 5 p.m. and didn't return until late that night. This timeline became a crucial focus point for further investigation. Further investigation found that Antonio spent the night with his mistress, Tatiana Garrett, and didn't meet her until 8 p.m. This left a 3-hour gap with no alibi. Based on evidence, detectives created a timeline of the murder. According to them, Antonio went to Jennifer's house on January 3rd around 1 p.m. and allegedly killed her while Noah was at school. Antonio then transferred funds from Jennifer's iPad to his account and left to pick up Noah from the bus stop around 4 p.m. Later, he returned to Jennifer's house, dropped off Noah, and went back to dispose of the body. He buried it in a shallow grave in a field near Roseford. Afterwards, he went to Tatiana's house and spent the night. Everything seemed carefully planned, but one mistake led the police to Antonio. The mistake was letting Noah see his mother's cell phone. The police had enough evidence to convict him but investigated further to confirm his guilt. This involved film experts and a trained dog that could detect cadaveric odors indoors. First, the dog was taken to Jennifer's home to familiarize itself with her scent. This was the same location where the crime had occurred, in her kitchen. The police then led the dog to Antonio's car, where it immediately picked up the same scent. This final piece of evidence solidified the detectives' suspicions of Antonio's involvement in the murder. After months of investigation, Antonio was arrested on February 8th and charged with first-degree murder, third-degree murder, and theft. He is currently being held at the Montgomery County Correctional Facility without bail, awaiting a preliminary hearing where he will face the law for his alleged crimes. Jennifer's loved ones were devastated by her death, especially since the killer was someone they trusted. Now that the killer has been brought to justice, the case was finally closed. The boy's observation of the killer's mistake played a crucial role in uncovering the truth and bringing the perpetrator to justice. The tragic events in Limer Township serve as a reminder that even the most meticulously planned crimes will ultimately be solved. Cruel and inhumane acts will not go unpunished, and those responsible will face the law. The case of Carrie Leah Farver. Carrie Leah Farver was born on November 30th, 1974, in Macedonia, Nebraska, USA. As a single mother, she raised her son, Max Maxwell, after experiencing failed relationships in the past. Raising Max was challenging for Carrie. Despite her immense love for her child, she struggled with depression, which led to a period where she spent a month in bed. During this time, her mother, Nancy Rainey, took care of Max. Carrie's difficult relationship with Max's father and unstable living conditions contributed to her mental health issues. At the age of 20, Carrie's struggles led to a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. This condition causes extreme mood swings, ranging from euphoria, increased productivity, and excessive friendliness to depression, bitterness, and feelings of powerlessness. Although bipolar disorder significantly complicates daily life, Carrie's doctor found an effective treatment for her in the early 2000s. With this treatment, Carrie was able to manage her condition and live a relatively normal life. Whether Carrie wanted to settle her personal life is an open question. On one hand, what woman doesn't dream of a suitable partner? On the other hand, why commit to someone who might bring worries and misfortunes? Carrie was raised in a loving family and had an active lifestyle. She played sports and aspired to become a doctor. However, her dreams were cut short during her first medical practice when she fainted at the sight of blood. Deciding not to risk her health or her patients, she pursued a career in programming instead. In the fall of 2012, Carrie received a job offer in Omaha with good prospects and decided to take it. However, her son Max was in middle school and preferred to stay in his familiar surroundings, so he remained with his grandmother in Macedonia. According to Amy, a friend of Carrie's father, Carrie had a radiant smile that drew attention whenever she entered a room. It was likely this quality that caught Dave Kropa's eye when they met at an auto repair shop in November 2012. As Carrie showed him something inside her car, a Ford Explorer, Dave felt an instant attraction. Their first date arrived soon after, but their time together was interrupted by numerous calls and messages from a woman named Liz, who eventually stopped by Dave's apartment to collect something she had left there earlier. Dave told Carrie about his past relationship with Liz, whom he met on a dating site 6 months prior. They had been together for a while, but he ended things because she was extremely clingy. Carrie was understanding and wasn't fazed by Liz's presence in Dave's apartment, recognizing that everyone has past relationships that can resurface. 2 weeks after moving in, Carrie started dating Dave. They had discussed their expectations beforehand and agreed to a brief, casual affair. Liz, whose full name is Shaunana Elizabeth Gollier, was the first person Dave met online in 2012. Dave and Liz had children around the same age. However, Dave felt Liz wasn't a suitable long-term partner due to her limited education and lack of shared interests. Their relationship focused more on physical intimacy than meaningful conversations. Over time, Liz grew increasingly interested in what Dave was doing when she wasn't around, particularly in regards to who he was seeing. However, Dave consistently reminded her that they were in an open relationship, implying that she shouldn't be concerned about his interactions with others. He also reassured her that she had the freedom to date other men if she chose to do so. Despite Dave's openness, Liz couldn't shake off her feelings of dissatisfaction and jealousy, particularly towards Dave's children and their mother, Amy. She struggled to understand the close bond that persisted between Dave and Amy even after their breakup. As a result, Liz's behavior became increasingly possessive, prompting Dave to create distance between them. It was during this period of separation that Carrie entered Dave's life. Carrie was not only beautiful but also stylish, intelligent, and a great conversationalist. Dave found himself lost in conversation with her for hours, feeling an undeniable connection as they shared common interests and perspectives. Liz noticed that Dave was becoming increasingly distant, so she tried to rekindle their connection by sending messages, emails, and making phone calls. However, he had no intention of stopping his interactions with Carrie or anyone else for her sake. Meanwhile, Carrie and Dave were spending more nights together, which was convenient for Carrie's work schedule and enjoyable for Dave. Carrie seemed to be taking things lightly, focusing on having fun and not looking for anything serious. In December 2015, Liz was shot and non-fatally wounded, leading her to suspect who might be responsible and realize she needed to take action. 2 years prior, on November 13, 2012, Carrie had kissed Dave goodbye before he left for work, expecting to see him later. However, that would be the last time they saw each other. At 9:45 a.m. that morning, Dave received a surprising text message from Carrie stating she wanted to move in with him permanently. Dave found this message disconcerting as they had previously discussed and agreed not to rush into a relationship, being happy with their current situation. Dave replied that he wasn't ready for such a change, but Carrie's response was unpleasant and filled with profanity. He was shocked to discover that all of Carrie's belongings were gone from the apartment. This led him to believe she had left him for good. That same day, Carrie also removed him as a friend on Facebook, which seemed like the end of the matter. However, Dave started getting multiple rude texts and emails from Carrie daily, containing curses and threats to ruin his life. Carrie sent a large number of these messages, all of which were aggressive. Uncharacteristically, she also stopped showing up for work, despite being known for her punctuality. Strange messages weren't only sent to Dave, but also to her mother and 15-year-old son, Max. She claimed to have found a job in Kansas and planned to take Max with her, but wanted to be alone for the time being due to worries over her failed romance. In May 2013, Carrie posted on Facebook that she'd left of her own free will and was tired of criticism. She wasn't missing her old life, but wasn't ready to return home. Carrie asserted her independence as a grown woman, stating that she had the right to leave home if she chose to. She apologized for hurting everyone by leaving abruptly. However, as time passed, Carrie failed to reappear. Her mother became increasingly concerned when Carrie missed important family events, including her own birthday, Max's birthday, and other celebrations. The final indication that something was seriously wrong was when Carrie missed her father's funeral. Liz began receiving messages from Carrie, which were insulting, humiliating, and even threatening. Carrie warned Liz to stay away from Dave. Confused by Carrie's behavior, Liz reached out to Dave, who revealed he was facing a similar situation. Carrie was sending him messages and emails, accusing him of wrongdoing, calling him a liar, and vowing revenge for the pain he allegedly caused her. The messages were sometimes ominous, with Carrie claiming to know what Dave was doing at the moment. The shared experience brought Dave and Liz closer together, but also made Dave feel guiltier about the trouble he had caused. The messages from Carrie grew more menacing and were filled with grammatical errors and illogical content. This was unusual, as Carrie's mother claimed that her daughter had always been a calm person who wrote coherent and well-structured letters and documents. Carrie was known to be meticulous about spelling and writing style. It's possible that she had experienced even more severe mental health issues. Her actions seemed to be driven solely by her uncontrolled mental state. A key indicator of dissociative identity disorder, also known as split personality, is the presence of separate, simultaneous self-consciousness in each ego, each with its own distinct memories, thoughts, behaviors, and inclinations toward specific actions. This might explain Carrie's unusual behavior and altered writing style. Everything suggested she was unstable, which is why the police didn't initially consider her missing, instead focusing on stopping the pursuit of Liz and Dave. They tried to track Carrie's cell phone, but it was unsuccessful due to blocked signals. Meanwhile, Liz and Dave continued to receive hundreds of texts and emails, sometimes simultaneously receiving nasty messages when they were together. Dave and Liz continued dating, but he felt uneasy around her as she became increasingly demanding. Despite claiming to be fine with their no-commitment relationship, Liz's behavior suggested otherwise. Every time Dave tried to end things with Liz, Carrie would start texting him, bonding with him over their shared victimization. This common ground drew Dave and Carrie closer together, causing them to reunite repeatedly. In January 2013, a missing car was surprisingly found in Dave's front yard. However, the fingerprints on the steering wheel didn't match Carrie's, and the car showed no suspicious signs. The police eventually returned the car to Carrie's parents. Carrie continued to message Liz and Dave, escalating her behavior by sending pictures of their children and threatening to harm them unless Dave left Liz alone. As time passed, Carrie's stalking persisted, and Liz's jealousy grew, frustrating Dave. He became exhausted with the events unfolding in his life and eventually found the strength to end his relationship with Liz. This decision came shortly after a tragic incident in August 2013, when Liz reported a fire at her home that resulted in the death of all her pets, including a snake, a cat, and 2 dogs. Liz suspected Carrie was responsible, citing repeated threats made via texts and emails. The incident marked a significant turning point in the case of missing person Carrie Farver, leading to Carrie's placement on a federal wanted list. Tens of thousands of messages were meticulously analyzed. Law enforcement seized cell phones from Dave and Liz, as they believed Dave was also in danger. Someone had vandalized the auto repair shop where he worked and thrown a brick through his window. It appeared that Carrie's anger was directed at anyone in Dave's life. Consequently, Amy Flora, Dave's ex-wife, began receiving threatening messages from Carrie. As Dave spent time with his children, he also saw Amy regularly. The police were perplexed as to why Carrie, who had dated Dave for less than 2 weeks, was now stalking Dave and his ex-wife. The investigators decided to focus on Dave Coupa, as Carrie's disappearance raised many questions that needed to be answered. It was a mystery that didn't add up. Carrie Farver's family was also tirelessly searching for her, exploring every possible lead to find her. Their efforts finally paid off in the spring of 2015, when detectives Ryan Avis and Jim Doty took on the case. Unfortunately, they found no evidence that Carrie was still alive. One of the detectives shared their thoughts with ABC News. It's unusual for adults to suddenly leave without using any money. No one saw or heard from her, which doesn't make sense. She had a good income and a nice home. I've come to believe that I have no proof she's alive. With the help of a digital forensics expert, the detectives analyzed data from Kropa and Gore's phones from 2013. Kawa discovered that Carrie had sent over 50,000 texts and 15,000 emails to Dave in just 3 years. Whoever was impersonating Carrie became increasingly sophisticated, trying to hide their IP address and true identity. Somebody with expertise in computer programs seemed to be behind the strange occurrences. In December 2015, Liz Garr contacted the police again, this time reporting that she had been shot in the leg on her own doorstep. She claimed her attacker was Amy Flora, not Carrie. Coincidentally, Dave was missing a gun that Amy may have had access to. This new development raised suspicions that Amy might be involved in Carrie's disappearance. The investigation uncovered a lead that suggested Amy's motive. She may have been seeking revenge against women connected to Dave Krupp. Amy's relationship with Dave had been complicated, and the presence of other women in his life might have prevented them from reuniting. The police promptly questioned Amy, but surprisingly, she had a solid alibi. Multiple witnesses confirmed that she was not at Liz's house when the shooting occurred, so no arrest was made. The investigation became increasingly puzzling. New details emerged from the analysis of Liz's cell phone data. Investigators found fake email addresses using variations of Farver's name and an app used to schedule messages. This discovery shed light on how Liz and Dave received simultaneous messages from Carrie. The investigation led to suspicion of Liz Gollier, which intensified when her fingerprint matched those on Carrie's car steering wheel. It was now clear who the culprit was, and the priority was to prevent further harm. To catch Liz off guard, detectives devised a plan to create a fake narrative, pretending to still consider Amy the prime suspect, aiming to prevent Liz from escaping or destroying evidence. Liz fell for the trap. She was thrilled at the opportunity to eliminate another rival who was threatening her relationship with Dave. Soon after, Liz Gollier gave the police an email supposedly written by Amy. The email included a confession to kidnapping Carrie, along with specific details about the crime. According to the confession, Carrie had been stabbed in the stomach or chest area before her body was disposed of. The email also revealed information about Carrie's car and home that had not been publicly disclosed. According to an investigative spokeswoman, Liz provided detectives with information that only someone intimately involved in the crime could have known. In doing so, she inadvertently implicated herself in Carrie Farver's murder. The letter made it clear that the crime occurred in a car, prompting authorities to re-examine the victim's vehicle. Upon removing the seat covers and fabric, specialists discovered a blood stain belonging to Carrie Farver. Liz managed to send messages posing as Carrie without arousing suspicion, but it's unclear how. Reports suggest that Liz Gollier led a double life, dating both Dave and a man named Garrett. Notably, Garrett's IP address was linked to messages sent under Carrie's name. When questioned, Garrett revealed that he had been in a long-term relationship with Liz. Out of kindness, Garrett invited Liz to move in with him and his children after a fire. However, their relationship became complicated and deteriorated significantly once they started living together. Garrett would often take care of Liz's children while she isolated herself in her room or left the house. Garrett was shocked by what the police told him. It was discovered that Liz spent 40 to 50 hours a week pretending to be a missing woman. Although her room was messy, no significant evidence was found. However, investigators did discover several cell phones and electronic devices in the last place she stayed. In late December 2016, Shaunana Liz was charged with first-degree murder. The county prosecutor commented on the complexity of the investigation, stating that most murders are dark, but this crime was particularly bizarre. It would take some convincing to make someone believe it actually happened. Liz's actions, including letting her dog die in a fire she set herself and shooting herself in the thigh, were attempts to deflect suspicion from herself. Liz's attorney, James Martin Davis, believed the case against her was weak since it was largely based on circumstantial evidence. Key pieces of evidence were missing, including Carrie's body and the crime weapon, and Liz had not confessed to the crime. In fact, there was no conclusive proof that Carrie was even dead. The defense team requested a mistrial, which would allow a judge to determine the extent of Shaunana's guilt. The prosecution presented a substantial amount of complex electronic evidence, as well as physical evidence. They argued that the amount of blood found on the passenger seat of Carrie's car supported the theory that she had been stabbed. Investigators also found a direct link between Shaunana and Carrie's murder by analyzing a memory card that Shaunana had used around the time Carrie went missing. The memory card, which was found in a tablet stored at Dave's residence, contained deleted images. It was clear that the foot belonged to a people who had been deceased for several years. Notably, Carrie had a similar tattoo among her distinguishing features. Her mother later confirmed that the tattoo indeed belonged to Carrie. The photo solidified the conviction of Shaunana Liz was predator. The judge ruled her guilty of first-degree murder and handed down a life sentence without parole, stating that Carrie Farver did not disappear by choice but was tragically murdered. Authorities suspect that Shaunana murdered Carrie, allowed her body to decompose, and then burned the remains to eliminate all evidence. Motivated by jealousy, she decided to eliminate her rival. After disposing of Carrie, Shaunana took her cell phone and used it to send messages that would make Farver appear unstable and win back Dave's favor. When this plan succeeded, Shaunana wanted to eliminate Amy as well, but she became too entangled in her own scheme and ultimately fell into her own trap. Shaunana, also known as Liz, was also found guilty of arson for setting fire to her own home in August 2013 and attempting to blame it on Carrie. The fire destroyed the house and killed pets, resulting in an additional 20-year prison sentence. She is currently serving her sentence at the Nebraska Correctional Center for Women, despite maintaining her innocence. Dave revealed that he received thousands of emails and text messages signed by Carrie over the years. However, he claimed that he never noticed Carrie stalking him during their relationship, which contrasts with his experience with Shaunana. So, what happened to Carrie's son, Maxwell Farver? According to his LinkedIn profile, he followed in his mother's footsteps and became a computer programmer. He graduated from the University of Iowa with a degree in software engineering and data science, and is now married. Although it's unlikely he's forgotten the past, he may have found some peace with his new family. As for Dave Kropa, he now lives a private life, away from the public eye. He doesn't have a public account on any social media platform. This disturbing crime story is a harsh reminder of the complexities and manipulation that can occur in human relationships. It highlights how vulnerable we can be in our own surroundings, unaware of the true nature of those around us. The case of Jessica Chambers. Jessica Lane Chambers was a 19-year-old woman from Cortland who had a complex and challenging upbringing. She lived with her mother near her grandmother's house, while her father and stepmother resided down the street. Despite her petite frame, Jessica had a strong and determined personality. Her family life was marked by turmoil and instability. Her father had a history of run-ins with the law, including a conviction for manufacturing methamphetamines and a DUI arrest in the early 2000s. This tumultuous environment was not unique to Jessica's family. Many of her friends and neighbors also experienced similar struggles. Tragedy struck Jessica's life at a young age. In 2006, a neighbor was shot multiple times in his yard. Jessica's own life was also marked by difficulties. She struggled with her parents, had rocky relationships with boyfriends who had trouble with the law, and occasionally engaged in violent outbursts during arguments. These behaviors intensified when she was 17, following the death of her older brother, Alan, in a car accident in 2012. After her mother disapproved of her new boyfriend, Jessica moved out of the family home for several months. Jessica's life was marked by challenges from a young age. Her father had served time in prison, but by 2014, he had turned his life around and was working as a mechanic for the local sheriff's department. Despite her own brushes with the law, including selling illicit substances and associating with local gangs, Jessica was a well-liked and respected member of her community. Her warm smile and friendly demeanor made her death all the more shocking and mysterious. When a car fire broke out in her hometown, rumors quickly spread that Jessica was involved. Her father, due to his connection to the sheriff's department, was immediately informed about the incident. He quickly relayed the news to his wife, who rushed to tell Jessica's mother. The women arrived at the hospital while Jessica was still alive. The investigation into the fire that killed Jessica initially focused on the possibility of a car accident. However, this theory was quickly dismissed due to the lack of evidence, such as skid marks or damage to the vehicle. The burned car showed no signs of impact or damage, which further ruled out the accident theory. The primary theory shifted to arson. However, the police had limited leads and insufficient evidence, which hindered the investigation. To gather more information, investigators interviewed numerous individuals who had contact with Jessica in the days leading up to her death. The list of potential suspects included Jessica's boyfriend, who was in prison at the time of the arson. However, this theory was eventually dismissed due to his alibi, as he had been living in Iowa since their breakup. Ali Ali, the owner of a local gas station, also came under suspicion, as he was one of the last people to see Jessica alive. After providing a statement, Ali was released. Another theory suggested that Jessica's association with a local gang may have led to her death. However, the gang members denied any involvement and expressed their condolences to the Chambers family. Many of the individuals questioned during the investigation had motives to lie, even if they were not directly involved in Jessica's death. The investigation appeared to be at a standstill, with no clear suspect or motive for the brutal act. Jessica's last week of life was meticulously reconstructed by investigators. It was discovered that on December 5, 2014, she drove to the M&M Minimart after receiving a phone call. There, she purchased $14 worth of gasoline and departed at 5:15 p.m. Half an hour later, at 5:45 p.m., Jessica called her mother, saying she would be home soon. At that time, she was wearing camouflage pajama pants and had her hair pulled back in a bun. Jessica made several more stops. These included visiting an unknown house and driving to a nearby town. Surveillance footage captured a man wearing a striped shirt filling a gas can with fuel. Although it's unclear where he went afterward, he did seem to be heading in the same direction as Jessica. According to her phone records, she spent 10 to 15 minutes stopped at a traffic light on Highway 2, headed toward Batesville. However, there is a significant gap in the timeline, from 6:30 p.m. to 7:32 p.m., often referred to as the mystery hour. Further investigation eventually shed some light on these missing minutes. It's believed that during this time, Jessica continued driving to her eventual destination. Her phone's GPS confirmed that at 7:30 p.m., she reached Heron Road. Unfortunately, it was on this very spot that her car would be discovered on fire. The investigation into Jessica Chambers' disappearance and death progressed slowly until December 2015, when 17 suspected gang members were arrested on unrelated charges. During plea negotiations, the gang members identified Quentin Tellis as someone who was with Jessica just an hour before the fire, after being offered a chance to cooperate with the investigation. The investigation focused on Quentin Tellis after reviewing Jessica's social media and cell phone activity. Tellis initially claimed he only met Jessica once, but after further questioning and presenting all their messages, he was arrested and charged with Jessica's murder through arson. Text messages show Tellis sent Jessica intimate requests on the day of the tragedy. At 9:02 a.m., Jessica texted Quentin, and he replied. Tellis texted, "I'm ready," at 10:09 a.m. and was picked up by Jessica shortly after. They picked up a friend at 10:49 a.m. and dropped Quentin off at 2:03 p.m. Tellis messaged Jessica again, asking for intimacy, his fourth such request in 4 days. Recovered deleted texts included, "I'm excited," and "Come lie with me," which Jessica ignored. The passenger seat in Jessica's burned car was pushed back, suggesting intimacy. Prosecutors argued this was evidence of their activities that evening. Tellis was charged with Jessica's murder and arson on February 24th. The investigation took time to build a case. The first trial began in 2017 in Batesville, Mississippi, with strict security measures in place. Prosecutor John Champion warned jurors of disturbing images of burned victim Jessica Chambers and 35 witnesses. Jessica met Quentin Tellis, 7 years her senior, around Thanksgiving 2014. FBI agent Dustin Blunt testified that Tellis met Jessica at a gas station through a friend and they spent intimate time together. Quentin Tellis had sent Jessica Chambers text messages requesting intimacy, even on the day of her death. The front seat of her burned car was adjusted downward, as Tellis had described. Tellis attempted to strangle Chambers, then set her on fire. Tellis confessed to investigators that he saw Chambers that night and they went to a fast food restaurant together. However, his alibi couldn't be confirmed, and he was seen on a store surveillance camera purchasing a phone card. Tellis didn't testify in his own defense. Prosecutors pointed to text messages where Tellis repeatedly requested intimacy from Chambers, who consistently denied him. FBI agent Dustin Blunt shared that Tellis deleted Chambers' contact information and text messages from his phone after her death. Tellis claimed he did this because he didn't want Chambers' number in his phone. Tellis and Chambers met through a friend at a gas station, and they had been intimate at some point. Tellis' DNA was found on Chambers' keys, and his cell phone records placed him at the location on the night of the fire. Despite this, Tellis maintained his innocence. Defense attorney Darla Palmer urged jurors to disregard the cell phone location evidence, arguing it couldn't prove Tellis and Chambers were at the same place. Tellis' family claims the police are looking for someone to blame in a highly charged racial issue. The first trial ended in a mistrial due to confusion over jury instructions. By the time of the retrial in 2018, Quentin Tellis was under investigation in Louisiana for the end-of-life of student Ming-Chin Xia, as well as for the illegal use of a stolen bank card. In May 2019, he was charged with second-degree murder in connection with Xia's demise. The second trial was notably challenging. Jurors were shown a photo of Jessica Chambers, which firefighter Cole had taken upon arriving at the scene. Cole was deeply disturbed by the image of Chambers, whose lips were severely burned and blackened with soot. Cole told the jurors that the photo Cole took of Chambers was etched in her memory, and she saw it every morning and every night. A veteran firefighter also testified that he had never seen a victim with such severe burns. When he found Chambers, she was lying on the ground, struggling to speak, and was sitting on a blanket. Her hair was singed, and her nose and mouth were surrounded by blisters that covered her entire body. Testimonies at the second hearing also included a woman named Sherry Flowers, who had not appeared at the first trial of Tellis but told investigators during questioning that she had picked up a hitchhiker on the night Jessica Chambers was tragically ended. Sherry Flowers did not recognize Tellis in court and agreed with the prosecutor that she did not know whom she had picked up. However, she told the court that a man flagged her down, and she stopped because she thought it was her cousin. She agreed to give a ride to the man, whom she described as an African-American male, about 20 years old, and of slim to medium build. Tellis, who was 5 feet and 9 inches tall, was 26 at the time. Initially, Flowers did not reach out to investigators, and when asked why in court, she said, "I couldn't remember," and thought it wasn't relevant to the case. Nevertheless, the prosecutors attempted to link this ride to the demise of Jessica Chambers, suggesting it provided Quentin Tellis with the opportunity to leave Jessica's car in order to return and set it on fire. However, the defense contested the timing, and Flowers admitted that she was unsure of the exact time of the ride. The investigator presented evidence that Jessica Chambers' keys were found in a ditch 2 days after her death, near the location where Tellis was picked up. However, the defense argued that it was impossible to prove where the keys had been at the time of the crime, and therefore, they should not be admitted as evidence. Despite the emotional testimony, the second jury was unable to reach a verdict in 2018, just like the first jury 2 years earlier. As a result, Quentin Tellis was not convicted of setting Jessica Chambers and her car on fire, and the case remains unsolved. However, many people continue to investigate the case online, searching for clues that may have been missed and developing their own theories about who was responsible for Jessica Chambers' death. The Jessica Chambers case began to garner widespread attention immediately after her death, but as the media's interest declined, internet sleuths around the world picked up the case. To this day, the mystery surrounding her final hours remains one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. On the night of the crime, Jessica left her house at 5 p.m. and told her mother she was heading to a nearby gas station. Security footage shows Jessica stopping at the gas station twice. During one of those visits, she pumped gas and then went towards the store, where she waved at someone off camera. Despite efforts to identify the person Jessica was waving at, the mystery remains unsolved. Although Quentin Tellis, 29, has been identified as the prime suspect, he is still incarcerated for a different crime. Consequently, justice for Jessica has yet to be achieved. Tragically, Lisa, Jessica's mother, passed away on October 29, 2021, at the age of 52, without seeing her daughter's case reach a conclusive outcome. The case of Roxana Valdez. Roxana Valdez was born in 1957 in a small village in the province of Punta Arenas, Chile. Roxana married a man whose name is not publicly known, and they had a son together. However, the marriage was not successful, and they separated in 2011. As a single mother, Roxana faced significant challenges in her small village, where job opportunities were limited. The community's main occupation was farming and selling produce, and the local schools focused on teaching agricultural skills. Roxana worked at the Don Gregorio boarding school, which trained students to become agricultural technicians. Her role was a night supervisor, responsible for ensuring the students' behavior and slept at night. She did not have a direct role in raising the children. Roxana's son attended the same boarding school, as she was unable to care for him during the day due to her work in the fields. At the boarding school where Roxana worked, Claudio Munoz Ramirez was the head of grounds maintenance. His nighttime work schedule led to him meeting Roxana. Despite their 14-year age difference, they discovered they had a lot to talk about. Roxana would often spend entire nights discussing school issues and her failed marriage with Claudio. They also shared commonalities in their personal lives. Claudio had 2 daughters he loved, but he felt disconnected from their mother and had considered divorce multiple times. However, he stayed in the marriage because of a promise he made to her late father. Over time, Claudio seemed to forget his promise and began spending more time with Roxana, away from his family. Eventually, he made a decisive move without explaining himself to his wife. He packed his belongings and left their home to be with Roxana, who happily welcomed him into her life. Their relationship moved forward quickly, but Roxana overlooked some important red flags. She welcomed a man she barely knew into her home, despite having children who needed her attention. As they had enjoyable conversations, Roxana failed to notice that Claudio had a temper and could be cruel. The first major incident occurred at the boarding school, where Claudio was in charge of cleanliness. During a scheduled cleanup day, some students refused to participate, which infuriated Claudio. He threatened to beat anyone who didn't help, despite having no teaching experience. Although it's unclear if he would have followed through on this threat, the students eventually started cleaning. Later, they collectively complained to the principal about Claudio's threats of physical violence. The principal, unhappy with Claudio, asked him to resign voluntarily. This was a significant setback, as the Don Gregorio boarding school was one of the few places in the area that offered stable and decent-paying jobs. After searching for work in fields and at fruit bases, Claudio realized it was a futile effort. He and Roxana decided to look for a better life elsewhere, but they left their son at the boarding school so he could continue his education. They didn't want to take any risks by bringing him along. To avoid relying on employers, who had already let them down, Claudio and Roxana decided to start their own small business, a fruit kiosk. They moved to Molina, a commune a couple of hours from the Chilean capital, known for its vineyards and wine exports. Roxana and Claudio bought a kiosk near their new home, found suppliers for vegetables and fruits, and started their small family business. Claudio took care of purchasing and transporting products, while Roxana handled sales throughout the day. They couldn't afford to hire an employee, as it would add to their expenses, and they worried that someone else might not take care of the perishable goods properly. Claudio became visibly upset and angry when he discovered Roxana was pregnant with their first child. This was a moment that required serious thought, but Roxana, caught up in their new relationship and thriving business, agreed with Claudio's suggestion to give the baby to her relatives to raise after birth. However, Roxana suffered a miscarriage afterwards. Following this, Claudio's behavior changed significantly. He frequently yelled at Roxana and occasionally turned violent. Neighbors, tired of the constant noise, often called the Chilean police, the carabineros, to intervene in their domestic disputes. One time, when the carabineros responded to a call, they found Roxana in tears and partially undressed, fleeing the house with Claudio chasing after her. Roxana revealed to the officers that she was suffering from ongoing domestic abuse, which had caused her miscarriage. The incident left her needing psychological support. However, as time went by, they seemed to put their issues behind them and continued living together as if nothing had happened. After the incident, Claudio should have faced charges, but Roxana chose to forgive him and give him another chance. She made him promise that it wouldn't happen again. Although Claudio promised to change, his past behavior with his ex-wife suggested that his words might not be reliable. Sadly, the past repeated itself. Claudio stopped physically abusing Roxana, but he started going out to local bars at night, drinking heavily and spending a lot of their family's money on alcohol and encounters with women. Roxana put up with her husband's behavior, hoping that he would settle down once they had a child. In a way, she was correct. After Roxana gave birth to a healthy child in 2013, Claudio changed his ways. He stopped going out and focused on their business, which was growing and needed more attention. They expanded their business by buying another kiosk and vehicle for transporting products. Roxana also invested in firearms for protection, as they lived and worked in areas that weren't very safe. The family's assets appeared to increase substantially, but this growth was only theoretical. In reality, Claudio resumed his previous habits, wasting money on alcohol and reverting to violent behavior towards Roxana. Roxana's account detailed how the abuse in their relationship escalated. At first, Claudio drank sporadically, but the frequency soon increased. When inebriated, he would return home, accuse Roxana of fictional affairs, and subject her to physical and sexual abuse. His actions seemed intentionally hurtful, even when Roxana was pregnant. This culminated in a miscarriage in August 2012, sending Roxana into a prolonged depression. On one occasion, following his typical routine, Claudio went to a local bar and didn't come back until the next morning. Roxana, accustomed to his behavior, still felt anxious about him. It was later discovered that Claudio had taken 5 million Chilean pesos, equivalent to around $6,000, which Roxana had obtained from selling her mother's house. He spent this money on alcohol and visits to brothels. Roxana was shocked and felt betrayed when she discovered that Claudio had taken the money meant for their shared business, which was hidden in their daughter's room. When Claudio came home late that evening, Roxana confronted him about the missing money. However, Claudio was uninterested in discussing the issue and instead hit Roxana, admitting that he had squandered all the money. This incident was the final straw for Roxana. Without saying a word, she went to their bedroom, retrieved a revolver that was meant for protection against local criminals, and shot Claudio in the chest. Claudio died instantly. Roxana was surprised by her own drastic action and attempted to stop the bleeding from the gunshot wound, but it was too late. The close-range shot from the .38 caliber revolver was fatal. In her testimony, Roxana expressed deep remorse and acknowledged the immorality of her actions. She confessed that when she retrieved the revolver, her intention was not to intimidate Claudio but to kill him. Roxana remembered the numerous times Claudio abused and assaulted her, and how she failed to report him to the authorities due to fear. She was afraid of being alone, especially after they had a child together. After shooting Claudio, Roxana's main concern was how it would affect their daughter if she were imprisoned and the child was sent to an institution. That night, Roxana decided to get rid of the body and report Claudio missing. She knew the police were aware of his frequent disappearances during drinking binges. As a delicate woman, disposing of the body was a daunting task. She decided to remove it piece by piece, using kitchen knives to cut the limbs and head. The process required 5 knives, as they kept becoming dull. Roxana then boiled the dismembered parts in large pots, all while playing with her young daughter, who was unaware of what her mother was doing and what had happened to her father. Roxana's calculated approach to disposing of the body, while trying to maintain a sense of normalcy for her daughter, shows the complexity and desperation of her situation. The day after cooking and cooling the body parts, Roxana packed them into separate plastic containers labeled by body part, hands, legs, head, and torso, and then placed each container into a garbage bag. She loaded the bags into her car and drove to St. Lucia to scatter them on a vacant lot. Before leaving, she cleaned her house thoroughly with bleach. However, upon arriving in St. Lucia, Roxana couldn't bring herself to dispose of the bags, despite finding a suitable location. Roxana was nervous during the drive, constantly feeling like she was being watched and fearing that the police would stop and search her car. This fear escalated into panic, prompting her to devise a backup plan involving her daughter, where she would pretend to rush her to the hospital if stopped by police. She even considered pinching her daughter to make her cry louder and make the situation more believable. Since Roxana couldn't discard the remains, she returned home and hid the bags in the garage. She then cleaned the interior of her car with bleach again and visited Claudio's relatives. She told the police that Claudio had stolen a large sum of money and hadn't been home for days, but they simply shrugged off her claims. Roxana visited her mother and brother, who were alarmed by her condition. She wasn't eating, had a glazed expression, and kept asking the same questions. The only question she answered clearly was about Claudio's absence, claiming he was delayed due to a flat tire while buying goods for their store. Overwhelmed by her thoughts and the hidden evidence, Roxana broke down and asked her brother for help. When he arrived, she revealed everything and showed him the containers. Her brother was shocked. Roxana wanted to unburden herself and share the traumatic experiences she had with Claudio, but she primarily needed her brother's help to dispose of the containers holding the body. However, her brother refused, fearing he would be implicated as an accomplice and face police involvement. He urged Roxana to confess to the Chilean police, the Carabineros, and threatened to do it himself if she didn't. Disappointed but with no alternative, Roxana decided to cooperate. That night, she went to the 4th police station to make a significant statement. The officers, who knew her, initially assumed she was there to report her problematic husband. However, they were stunned by what she revealed. Roxana was arrested on the spot. News of her arrest spread quickly, drawing numerous journalists to the station. As the journalists waited, Roxana was eventually brought out, visibly distressed and in handcuffs. Before being escorted into a police car, she exclaimed, "I was afraid he would kill me one day." At first glance, the case seemed straightforward. Roxana had confessed, provided evidence, and surrendered voluntarily. Nevertheless, prosecutor Monica Bisos was skeptical of Roxana's easy confession and wanted a more thorough investigation. Prosecutor Bisos asked to extend Roxana's arrest to allow for further forensic examination. The goal was to determine if Claudio was still alive when his body was dismembered, which would have led to a longer sentence for Roxana. The judge agreed to a 60-day detention to continue the investigation. At the same time, Roxana's lawyer, Carolina Gutierrez, argued that Roxana committed the crime under extreme emotional distress. This could have been made worse by postpartum depression and the domestic abuse she suffered. Gutierrez highlighted Roxana's cooperation with the authorities and her voluntary confession as reasons for a more lenient sentence. However, forensic results later showed that Claudio died from a gunshot wound to the chest, disproving the prosecution's theory that he was alive during dismemberment. As a result, the factors that would have increased Roxana's sentence were dismissed. Another lawyer, Juan Pablo Cardenas, pointed out that the gun used in the murder was registered. He also noted that Roxana first reported domestic violence to the police just 20 days after they moved in together. Psychologist Rodrigo Valenzuela conducted a medical examination and presented documents to the court showing that Roxana was severely mentally unstable when the crime occurred. This instability, linked to the loss of 2 children, meant she wasn't fully aware of her actions. Additionally, forensic results revealed that Claudio had a high blood alcohol level at the time of his death on April 17, 2015. Roxana's trial began after a year of investigations and evidence gathering. During the trial, Roxana refused to make statements due to her distress over the media portrayal. Prosecutors emphasized the severity of the crime, but couldn't prove premeditation. The defense argued that Roxana acted in self-defense against a man who had brutally mistreated her for years. The court hearing in Chile lasted several weeks, captivating the entire nation. Prosecutor Monica sought a 15-year prison term for Roxana, the accused. After considering the defense and the jury's input, the judges sentenced Roxana to 6 years in a correctional facility with a relatively lenient regime. Claudio's family, who had hoped for a life sentence or even the death penalty for Roxana, were outraged by the court's decision. They had already been upset when the prosecutor requested a 15-year sentence, which they felt was too lenient. The family attempted to downplay any history of domestic violence and claimed that Claudio, a financially independent businessman, would not have stolen $6,000 from Roxana. Additionally, they alleged that Claudio had confided in them about Roxana's threatening behavior, stating that she would often retrieve a revolver from the closet and threaten to kill him. In a press interview, Claudio's sister shifted the blame to the Chilean state, arguing that the country's judicial system is corrupt and fails to deliver justice, as evidenced by the relatively short sentence given to Roxana, which she compared to punishments for minor thefts. Giselle, Claudio's first wife, spoke out in his defense. She stated that Claudio was never violent during their many years together. In contrast, Roxana frequently started arguments due to her jealousy and possessiveness. Roxana was initially imprisoned, but after serving 2/3 of her sentence, she was transferred to a semi-open education center in Tala for good behavior. She was allowed to stay in contact with her daughter and was eventually released early. The media reignited public interest in the case, and many people were outraged by her early release. However, some individuals, despite viewing Roxana as a murderer, believed her actions were justified because they saw her as a victim. The debate surrounding this case continues to this day. This story emphasizes the severe consequences that can occur when domestic violence is not addressed promptly. The case of Antonia Barra. Antonia was born in the late 1980s to a loving family that valued closeness and togetherness. Her parents, Alejandro and Marcela, raised 5 children in a spacious home, providing a nurturing environment where care and attention were abundant. The children were well-behaved and kind, and the household was generally free of significant problems. Antonia, however, stood out from her siblings due to her exceptional qualities from a young age. She was remarkably perceptive, responsible, and ambitious, which made her a source of great pride for her parents. She consistently excelled academically, had positive relationships with her teachers, and had clear plans for her future. Antonia's aspirations included traveling and living a fulfilling life. After high school, Antonia successfully enrolled in her preferred university and began pursuing a highly competitive major. As a freshman, she dedicated herself to mastering the fundamentals of her chosen profession and actively participated in both academic and social activities, forming close bonds with like-minded friends who shared her interests and ambitions. Antonia had become particularly close to Consuelo Uribe, a law student. They friends enjoyed spending time together, going shopping, attending parties, and socializing. Their friendship deepened over time. When Antonia's boyfriend Rodrigo broke up with her, Consuelo suggested a distraction to help her cope with the heartbreak. Antonia, struggling to come to terms with the breakup, welcomed her friend's idea. To take her mind off the past and briefly escape her sadness, Antonia and Consuelo planned a trip to Pucón, a tourist town in Chile, to celebrate the country's Independence Day on September 18th. The music festival was scheduled to take place at the Black Room Club on the evening of September 17th. At around 6:30 p.m., Antonia, Consuelo, and 3 other friends, including Consuelo's boyfriend, set off for Pucón. The trip was smooth, and upon arrival, the group stayed in separate accommodations, with they staying in a summer house owned by the Uribe family. After 8 p.m., they got ready to head to a party at Black Room, a well-known spot that promised an unforgettable night. Before leaving, Antonia texted her dad, who reminded her to be careful around people she didn't know. Antonia assured him that being cautious was second nature to her. They had a great time chatting and dancing with friends. As fate would have it, Martin and Antonia unexpectedly ran into each other at the club. They were thrilled to see each other and spent the evening together, chatting and dancing. Throughout the night, Antonia would occasionally leave Martin's side to check in with her friend and greet other male acquaintances she had met while bar hopping. However, she didn't realize how much she had been drinking, likely due to the long drive and her empty stomach. This was unusual for her, as she normally didn't let herself get carried away with alcohol. Consuelo told Antonia it was time to leave the club, but Antonia was having too much fun and refused to go. Consuelo warned her to stop drinking and think about leaving, but Antonia was determined to stay. Despite Consuelo's concerns, Antonia chose to stay at the club, and Consuelo left without her. However, Antonia would soon come to regret her decision. One of their friends stayed at the club and saw what happened next. He later shared what he saw during the investigation and in court. He said that Martin started talking to Antonia and then took her hand, leading her towards the exit. Antonia seemed unsure and confused, likely because she had been drinking too much. Although she was in a daze, Antonia didn't seem to resist or mind being led away. It was unclear if she even knew what was happening. But external surveillance footage told a different story. According to Martin's friends, they left the club in 2 cars, but there was no room for her, so she ended up walking with them. Along the way, they passed a store, and footage showed that the man had forced her to enter. She was visibly intoxicated and unable to resist. Throughout the night, Martin, who was somewhat more sober than the others, attempted to exert control over the situation. The footage captured moments of Martin being overly affectionate towards her and trying to kiss her, despite her clear reluctance and attempts to pull away. After arriving upstairs around 9 a.m., Consuelo checked her messages and found a voice message from her friend Antonia. Initially, Consuelo had trouble making out what Antonia was saying, but after listening more closely, she caught a few words. Antonia was asking to be picked up, but Consuelo didn't know exactly where she was. To find her, Consuelo used her GPS and, accompanied by her boyfriend Jose, headed to the location indicated. Upon entering the house, Consuelo and Jose were shocked to find Martin standing naked, attempting to cover himself with a pillow. When Consuelo asked about her friend Antonia, Martin claimed he didn't know where she was. However, they soon found Antonia upstairs in one of the rooms, lying on a bed in her underwear, crying quietly. Jose carried her to the car, and Consuelo asked what had happened, but Antonia was too distraught to explain. At the summer house, Consuelo and Jose tried to comfort Antonia, holding her and talking to her. Eventually, Antonia opened up about what had happened. She confessed that Martin had taken advantage of her against her will, leaving her feeling powerless. After learning about the incident, Jose and Consuelo urged Antonia to report the attacker to the police and pursue justice. However, Antonia declined, fearing that her parents and the public would find out and judge her. Instead, she chose to silently cope with the trauma and try to heal on her own, asking Jose and Consuelo to keep the incident private. During a conversation with her father, Antonia tried to respond normally to his light-hearted question about whether she had been drinking too much. However, her response unintentionally revealed her distress. The next day, Antonia met with Martin to discuss the incident, but he was uncooperative and arrogant. Martin claimed that the events of the previous night were consensual, which made Antonia realize that she would not receive the truth or an apology from him. She understood that she needed to try to move forward. Antonia stayed quiet and acted normal for 3 weeks. A close childhood friend claimed not to notice anything unusual, but Antonia's classmates observed that her memory was faltering and her thoughts were disorganized. But some time later, Alejandro eventually discovered the truth about his daughter. Alejandro shared his daughter Antonia's heartbreaking story, which sparked a nationwide movement. Multiple women came forward with similar allegations against Martin, leading to 6 new charges and his exposure as a serial offender. The Martin family sought court protection for their personal information, which had been leaked online. They claimed that the online harassment, including insults, threatening messages, and false information, had violated their constitutional right to privacy. The court agreed, and on June 12, 2020, it ordered Antonia's relatives to stop sharing information about the Martin family on social media and to refrain from publishing anything that could compromise them. However, this decision sparked widespread outrage in Chile. Many people felt that the court was protecting the suspect rather than the victims. On July 21st, the Antonia family appealed the decision to the Supreme Court, but their appeal was rejected. The suspect's lawyer then requested protective measures on his client's behalf, but the suspect was eventually charged with multiple counts of attack. The case, known as the Antonia case, became a rallying cry for victims of violence in Chile. For many women, it marked a turning point, and they began to come forward to share their own experiences after years of silence. On July 22nd, a surprising turn of events occurred when the court changed Martin's preventive measure from detention to house arrest, effectively releasing him. The judge clarified that this decision did not imply a reduced sentence. Meanwhile, the prosecutor had charged Martin with 5 counts of misconduct, but the court only recognized 2. This sparked widespread outrage, with thousands of people taking to the streets to protest the halt in investigations and the decision to place Martin under house arrest. In response to public pressure, the authorities appealed the decision, and the judiciary quickly overturned the house arrest order, taking Martin back into custody. Antonia stressed the importance of taking action against Martin, as his behavior made women vulnerable. In February 2021, investigators found Martin's phone, which contained a disturbing collection of photos of women's underwear, suggesting a trophy collection. The 400-page police report included statements from multiple victims, witnesses, and people close to Martin and Antonia. A childhood teacher described Martin as a smart and cheerful child, but noted that he had an unusual interest in intimate topics. Some women recalled that Martin had inappropriately touched them when they were children, but at the time, no one thought much of it. On June 14, 2022, the criminal court in Temuco began its hearings, which were expected to last over a month. During this time, the prosecution presented evidence, expert testimonies, and witness statements. The court started watching a CCTV. Video footage revealed that Antonia was unable to control the situation. On August 26th, Martin was sentenced to 20 years in prison for crimes against intimacy and intimacy-related aggression. However, on December 29th, the Supreme Court accepted the defense's appeal, disagreeing with the verdict. A new trial was scheduled for spring 2023. In a related development, Martin's original lawyers resigned on March 16th, and the public defense took over his case. The second trial began on April 24th, 2024, focusing on 5 counts of violence and 2 counts of forced intimacy. During the trial, Martin waived his right to remain silent and provided his account of the events. He claimed that his actions were the result of severe intoxication. However, the prosecutor countered that by drinking with the victims, he had taken advantage of their vulnerability. Ultimately, Martin was found guilty on July 7, 2023. The federal prosecution sought a prison sentence of 41 years, but on July 28, 2023, Martin only was sentenced to 17 years in prison for committing 7 intimacy-related crimes against 6 victims. Since he had already spent time in custody, he would serve 14 years. The case of Klondike Bishimbayev. Klondike Bishimbayev was born on April 11, 1980, in Gil, Kazakh SSR. Klondike Bishimbayev grew up with his younger sister Arujin, born in 1984. He received 3 higher educations, studying at Kazakh Academy of Management, Taz University, and George Washington University through a presidential scholarship. At 26, he defended his PhD thesis in economic sciences. Klondike began his career as a bank manager in 2000. He briefly interned at the Ministry of Economy, then held senior positions in large companies before returning to the ministry in 2016. He became the young head of the ministry but was dismissed 8 months later due to a bribery scandal, sentenced to 10 years in prison. However, he was released on parole after just 1 year. In his personal life, Klondike was married twice. His first wife, whom he married in 1999 and had a son in 2000. They divorced in 2004. In 2006, he married, with whom he had 3 children before divorcing in 2020. After a few years, he married Sultanat Nuknova. Sultanat Nuknova was born on May 15, 1992, in Pavlodar, Kazakhstan. She was the youngest of 2 children to businessman father and economist mother. Her uncle was a prominent politician. As a schoolgirl, Sultanat became interested in astrology, studying literature and making accurate predictions for friends and classmates. She turned her hobby into a career, achieving success quickly. Sultanat promoted her astrological services on social media, offering consultations, forecasts, and guidance on goal achievement, career choice, and spiritual growth. She also gave advice on love affairs and relationships, with a client base consisting only of women and girls. She quickly achieved financial independence by doing what she loved. Her services were in high demand, with consultations scheduled months in advance. She had gained a large following on social media and was living her dream life. In spring 2022, Klondike stumbled upon Sultanat's page on a popular social network. He liked Sultanat and decided to contact her for an astrological consultation, but she turned him down, saying she only served women. This rejection only fueled his interest, and the politician persistently tried to get her attention, showering her with compliments, convinced that only she could help him as a trusted specialist. Sultanat was flattered but refused to meet Klondike, who repeatedly asked her out despite Sultanat offering online consultations. He persisted for months, gathering information about her life, habits, and interests, but she remained uninterested. Sultanat initially refused to meet the man, but eventually agreed to a meeting for face-to-face counseling. Despite his good impression, polite behavior, and courtesy, she told her brother that he was not her type and they wouldn't match. Initially, Sultanat was not worried about Klondike because she knew she could keep him. However, within a month, the situation changed when Klondike gained influence by befriending a respected older member of the family, Sultanat's grandmother. Klondike asked to speak to Sultanat's grandmother, asking for her support in case Sultanat changed her mind about marrying him. This gesture touched Sultanat, but she still refused to pursue a relationship with him. Sultanat visited her parents in Pavlodar in fall 2022 and mentioned no serious changes in her personal life were expected. She confided in her brother that the 12-year age difference with Klondike confused her and she wasn't attracted to him, also citing astrological incompatibility. Sultanat's brother was shocked to see a post on his social media that his sister had accepted Klondike's marriage proposal just a month after their visit. This news surprised both her family and friends, as she had recently said that nothing serious would happen. A few months later, in December 2022, they held a luxury wedding at a budget establishment in Astana. The marriage was not officially registered, with they opting for a mosque ceremony instead. Sultanat's attitude towards her partner changed significantly after the wedding. She praised his intelligence, education, and conversation skills to friends, and denied his involvement in a corruption case that led to his brief imprisonment, claiming he was framed. From the outside, they seemed happy. He showered her with gifts, and she called him the perfect husband. Friends envied their relationship, thinking she was lucky. However, this didn't last. After the wedding, they moved into his parents' house, where his mother, Almira, spoiled her with gifts and protected her from household chores, but couldn't shield her from her son's true nature. Sultanat would periodically visit her parents with her husband, but she wouldn't invite them to her home because it would annoy Klondike and cause arguments. At first, none of her relatives were aware of this. However, less than a month after the wedding, on New Year's Eve, Sultanat's brother visited and witnessed a disturbing scene. A large, festive table had been set, but the celebration was only for the immediate family. When Quandik's cousin and his wife arrived with gifts for everyone, Sultanat was embarrassed because she didn't have a gift in return. She quickly found a solution by giving Quandik's cousin's wife a bottle of expensive perfume that her husband had bought her the day before, but she hadn't had a chance to open it yet. Quandik was not just displeased, but enraged by her actions. He yelled at her, claiming she had no right to give away something he had paid for, and began insulting her. The guests quickly left, and when her parents tried to intervene, they were rudely shut down. In a fit of rage, Quandik overturned the table, spilling food and drinks everywhere, and ruining the New Year's Eve celebration. Sultanat's brother was shocked by the scene and didn't know how to react. The next day, Sultanat confided in him over the phone that her husband's behavior had changed dramatically since their wedding, and she was unsure of the reason, but hoped the situation would improve with time. Sultanat Nukanova's brother advised her to end the relationship and return home, but she flatly refused. 2 months later, she sent him selfies showing severe bruises on her face, asking him not to ask any questions. Concerned, her brother tried to contact her, but she didn't answer his calls. He then reached out to her husband, Quandik, who agreed to meet with him. During their meeting, Quandik told Sultanat's brother to stay out of their business and refused to explain the cause of the bruises on his wife's face. Quandik was also unable to account for Sultanat's whereabouts, which filled him with uneasy thoughts. Fortunately, Sultanat was eventually found at her parents' country home. Despite the pleas of loved ones, Sultanat returned to her husband, insisting that she loved him and was willing to do anything to save their marriage. For a while, he behaved impeccably, showering her with gifts and promising to change for her sake. They even took a vacation together to a popular resort in the Maldives, where they appeared to be very happy. Sultanat didn't explicitly complain about her marriage, but her behavior and appearance changed. She lost weight, became withdrawn, and wore revealing clothing, possibly to hide bruises. She stopped working as an astrologer and blogger, and only posted happy photos with her husband on social media. Quandik took away her source of income, making her reliant on him. She was not allowed to socialize without his permission and was monitored at all times. Despite appearing perfect to outsiders, their relationship was actually controlling and suffocating. Sultanat confessed to her friend that her husband exerted total control over her, forbidding her to work or contact her parents without his knowledge, and was irrationally jealous, accusatory, and abusive. Despite her friend's horror and advice to leave him, she insisted she just wanted to talk, not be advised. They sought help from a family psychologist to save their marriage. Sultanat's husband rejected her therapist options and instead chose his own specialist, who blamed Sultanat for all their problems. She suspected her husband had hired the therapist to humiliate her. In summer 2023, Sultanat tried to leave him and stay with her parents, but her husband appeared a week later, asking for another chance and suggesting a change of environment to save their marriage. Sultanat hoped having a child would change her husband's attitude, but she couldn't get pregnant. After a family dinner in October, she briefly left her husband and moved into a rented apartment found by her brother. However, she returned to her husband 10 days later and even remarried him in a mosque ceremony, which she personally told her family about. On November 5th, she invited her family and close friends to her cousin's restaurant. Quandik made a good impression with his chivalrous behavior, being attentive and affectionate towards her. Everyone believed his feelings were genuine, but tragedy was looming. On November 9th, a relative contacted Sultanat's brother over the phone, sounding frightened as she asked about the truth of a social media rumor. After clarification, she shared a news link which reported that a former economy minister had taken the life of his young wife. Sultanat had asked to stay with him for a night after threatening to leave her husband. He agreed and told her where to find the spare keys, but she never arrived and her phone stopped working. He rushed to her house, but found no one there, and her husband was not answering his phone, which made things even more concerning. The decision was made to immediately go to the family restaurant, where Sultanat was last in contact, to search for answers. While on the way, he received a call from his frightened parents, who had also read the news and were trying to find out what had really happened. However, he couldn't provide them with any information and only promised to look into it. When he arrived at the restaurant, he was met by police officers who expressed their condolences and informed him that his sister had sadly passed away before receiving medical attention. Overwhelmed and disbelieving, he struggled to accept the news, but tragically, it was confirmed to be true. By the time he arrived, the main suspect, Klondike, had already been arrested and taken to the station. Klondike denied any guilt, claiming that the event was a terrible accident and that he was trying to help his wife. Also, the restaurant owner was taken into custody on suspicion of being involved in the incident. Several months ago, on the evening of November 8, 2023, Sultanat and Klondike and their friends attended a concert by singer Dima Bilan. The loud music made it difficult for their friends to follow the conversation between the spouses, who got into a heated argument. Initially, their friends thought they were just discussing something, but it soon became clear that they was engaged in a full-blown fight. They stormed out of the concert hall without saying a word to anyone and went to the restaurant bow, where they continued to quarrel in a private VIP booth. Camera footage shows Klondike taking several bottles of alcohol from the bar and joining his wife in the booth. As they drank wine and discussed their relationship, she told him that she couldn't continue like this and planned to leave him. Infuriated by her statement, Klondike started shouting and threatening her, even slapping Sultanat. After the altercation, she called her brother and told him she would be coming to his house for the night, having finally made up her mind to leave her husband. Around midnight, she stepped outside, intending to go to her brother's house, but her husband caught up with her and the argument continued. The surveillance footage reveals a 15-minute argument between them, after which Klondike convinced his spouse to re-enter the building. They continued to quarrel in the vestibule and eventually secluded themselves in a stall with no camera coverage, making it impossible to determine exactly what occurred inside. In the hallway, cameras recorded Klondike aggressively pursuing his wife, Sultanat, as she attempted to create distance. He grabbed her hands, shook her, and pushed her against the wall. Klondike's lawyer downplayed these actions, describing them as stroking. However, Sultanat tried to escape and locked herself in the toilet to evade her husband's aggression. Undeterred, he kicked the door, resulting in corresponding injuries. After forcing his wife to open the door, Klondike physically assaulted her, striking her multiple times in the face. He berated her, claiming that she lived at his expense. The events that followed are unclear, but Klondike alleged that his wife had an angry outburst and, in a fit of rage, removed all her clothes and jewelry, flushing them down the toilet to demonstrate her independence from him. According to another account, Klondike allegedly forced his wife to undress, intending to humiliate her further after the gold jewelry was lost down the drain. This led to Klondike becoming enraged, punching his wife in the face multiple times, and then pushing her with such force that she fell and hit the toilet. However, during the trial, Klondike claimed that his wife was intoxicated and had fallen several times while undressing, hitting her head on the tiles and plumbing fixtures. Klondike and his wife had planned to go home after leaving the restaurant, but he refused to drive due to his intoxication. He was ashamed of his drunken wife, who was wearing only underwear under her coat, and didn't want to call a cab. They decided to return to their VIP booth instead. However, when Sultanat stopped to look at her reflection in the mirror, her husband forcefully pushed her towards the exit. This quickly escalated into a brutal assault, as he mercilessly beat her with his hands and feet and dragged her by the hair. At around 7 o'clock in the morning, he dragged her back to the VIP cabin, where he continued his attack. Klondike ultimately caused severe harm to Sultanat, but during the trial, he claimed he had no involvement in her injuries. According to him, she had fallen and hit the floor and furniture on her own, and then fell asleep on the sofa. He alleged that he noticed a bruise on her face, but rather than seeking medical attention, he consulted a fortune teller to determine if everything was all right with his wife. The fortune teller told Klondike his wife was drunk and needed sleep, so he calmed down and didn't touch her. Later, he realized she wasn't breathing and called his brother, Bakan Banov, also the restaurant owner. Together, they deleted CCTV footage, claiming it showed his wife's indecent behavior. Banov called an ambulance in the evening, but she had already died. He claimed to have tried CPR, but it was too late. Both brothers were arrested by law enforcers. Klondike's former wife, Nazim, was also under scrutiny several years ago when her then-husband was arrested on corruption charges. She defended him at the time, but soon after his release, she filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and claiming she had outgrown the marriage. However, after her ex-husband was accused of brutally murdering his new girlfriend, Nazim gave a candid interview, admitting that she believes him to be capable of such a crime. She explained that her 14-year marriage to Klondike changed dramatically in 2011 after the birth of their second child. Klondike became increasingly aggressive, selfish, and narcissistic, thinking that the world should revolve around him. Nazim also revealed that her husband frequently cheated on her, openly flaunting his infidelities. However, it wasn't until his phone data was accessed during his 2017 arrest that she discovered the full extent of his cheating. He had multiple mistresses, and they constantly changed. After Klondike was released from prison, his behavior became even more violent and aggressive, according to Nazim. A disagreement erupted between them a month later, sparked by a minor issue. However, Klondike's reaction was excessive, as he became enraged and ripped a toilet lid from the wall with his bare hands, throwing it at Nazim. Although she dodged, the incident made her realize that the marriage was unsalvageable in her opinion. Klondike had apparently restrained his true nature for a long time because he knew Nazim wouldn't tolerate his darker impulses. Klondike had a sinister strategy. He initially chose a victim, tested her limits, and pushed her to see how much she would tolerate. Once he was convinced that she wouldn't leave or complain, he revealed his true self as a sophisticated sadist. The trial of Klondike began in March 2024, with relatives of Sultanat pushing for an open trial to prevent him from using his wealth and connections to influence witnesses and judges. Klondike, who had previously been convicted of a serious offense but released on parole, requested a jury trial to avoid a life sentence. A jury of 12 was selected, and in this case, a life sentence would require a unanimous decision from all jurors and the judge, a very unlikely outcome. Klondike denies premeditated murder, claiming the event was an accident. He says his spouse provoked him, but video recordings contradict him. Initially, authorities considered charging him with domestic violence, a crime with lenient punishment in Kazakhstan. However, this sparked outrage, particularly from the victim's mother, who feels her son-in-law may get off too lightly, undermining her faith in justice. A law was approved in April 2024 to toughen penalties for domestic violence in Kazakhstan following public outrage. Klondike tried to pressure his brother into giving false testimony and also attempted to discredit his late wife in court, calling her an inadequate, unbalanced, and alcoholic who provoked him. He claimed he acted in a state of passion, hitting her only a few times, and that her other injuries were self-inflicted from falling under the influence of alcohol. However, Klondike was alleged that he didn't allow called medics for Sultanat and was instead concerned with deleting footage from cameras. Klondike ordered his brother to fake his wife's phone activity, making it seem like she was home. However, the plan didn't work. Klondike was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 24 years. Klondike's brother Bakan Banov was given a 4-year sentence for complicity. Sultanat's family expressed dissatisfaction with the court's decision. Her father hoped for a life sentence for his former son-in-law, calling any other verdict unfair. The case of Donald Alban Blom. Donald Blom was born on February 5, 1949, in Minnesota. He had a difficult childhood, experiencing physical abuse from his father from a young age until his teenage years. As a result, Blom developed behavioral problems and began drinking heavily at an early age. These issues continued into his teenage years, and Blom was eventually sent to a reform school in 10th grade, where he frequently skipped classes. The trauma of his violent relationship with his father likely contributed to his behavioral and alcohol problems, which became more pronounced during puberty. Fast forward to May 26, 1999. Caitlin Poirier was working the night shift alone at a convenience store. After midnight, a customer called the police to report that the clerk was missing. When officers arrived, they found the store empty. Reviewing the surveillance footage, they saw a large man grabbing Caitlin by the neck and leading her out of the store around 11:40 p.m. A man wearing jeans, a backwards baseball cap, and a New York Yankees jersey with the number 23 was seen acting suspiciously near a store. Catherine Hannick, an employee at the nearby Subway restaurant, reported seeing the man behaving strangely before Caitlin's store closed. As she drove home, she coincidentally encountered the same man, who was driving a black Ford F-150 pickup truck with an extended cab and white markings on the side. Hannick followed the truck from a distance and saw it circle the maintenance area several times before entering Moose Lake and stopping in a cafe parking lot. She also noted that Caitlin's car was still in the store's parking lot when she left work. Based on Hannick's description and partially recovered surveillance footage, police created a rough sketch of the suspected kidnapper. The suspect had long blonde hair and looked approximately 25 years old. Based on descriptions from 4 witnesses, a composite sketch was created and shared with the public through local TV and newspapers, seeking information about the person. As the search for evidence continued, hundreds of people from throughout the state gathered to help comb the wooded area around the station, hoping to find the missing Katie Poirier. Police used service dogs and helicopters to search for Katie, but their efforts yielded nothing. Her photo was widely circulated in newspapers and on billboards, making her case a high-profile missing persons investigation. Authorities checked the local sex offender facility, which was near the store where Katie disappeared, and confirmed that all inmates were present and accounted for. This information helped rule out the possibility of a kidnapping by a fugitive offender. Police then focused on searching for a vehicle with a specific license plate number, which led them to Donald Blom. However, the truck at his residence was white, not matching the description of the vehicle they were looking for. The official search for Katie ended on June 6, 1999, without any success. Despite the official search ending, many volunteers continue to look for Katie, hoping that someone might have seen something that could lead to her safe return. Investigators were also waiting for the perpetrator to make another mistake, which could help them crack the case. Maps marked searched areas, but Katie remained missing. 2 weeks later, a man called the hotline, reporting co-worker Donald Hutchinson, who matched the composite sketch and had recently stopped driving his black pickup truck, was absent the day after the abduction and got a haircut. An investigation into Katie's disappearance revealed a surprising discovery about Donald Hutchinson. He was actually an alias for Donald Blom, a man who had a hidden black pickup truck in his garage and owned property just 12 miles from the store in Moose Lake where Katie worked. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered Blom's dark past, which included convictions for sex crimes involving the kidnapping of petite young girls, much like Katie. With this new information, detectives quickly obtained a search warrant for Blom's property. Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension agents tracked down Blom to a campground 140 miles outside of Richfield and brought him in for questioning. They also discovered that Blom had purchased the Moose Lake property 2 years prior, and neighbors confirmed he had been a frequent visitor until Katie's abduction. Blom's supervisor at the veterans' home where he worked stated that he had never seen Blom's real name, as he went by the alias Hutchinson, and was unaware of his criminal record. Colleagues described Blom as a loner who kept to himself. After his arrest, Blom initially cooperated with authorities but soon requested an attorney and refused to testify. Meanwhile, authorities conducted searches that yielded several items from Blom's home, but no official statement was made about what they found. Meanwhile, the search party resumed their efforts on the second day with increased enthusiasm. Katie's mother remained hopeful that her daughter was alive. On Donald Blom's property, fragments resembling bone were found in a fire pit's ashes. The fragments were sent to a lab and confirmed to be bone. A tooth was also found and sent to forensic dentist Dr. and Norlander for analysis. She used alternative methods to verify the tooth's origin, as DNA in the pulp would have been destroyed. A filling confirmed it was human and matched those used for Katie. Researchers identified it as a young woman's tooth, making it likely to belong to Katie. Katie Poirier's kidnapper, Blom, was charged with kidnapping and unlawful possession of a firearm, a federal offense due to his prior convictions. He was initially unwilling to consider a plea agreement, but later changed his mind, agreeing to testify on the condition that he be allowed to call home on September 8th. During his confession, Blom recounted the events of May 26, 1999, stating that he had gone fishing and then returned to his home in Richfield, only to drive back to his Moose Lake residence. On his way, he stopped at a bar for a beer and saw Katie in a store while she was conducting business. Blom, who did not know Katie, grabbed her and forced her into his pickup truck. He then drove her to his home, where he strangled her to death from behind, a process that took approximately 20 minutes. Blom claimed that he did not commit any other type of assault on Katie. After killing her, he placed her body in a fire pit, gathered wood and paper, and attempted to burn her remains. However, Blom's account of the events was inconsistent with the video camera footage and the evidence found in the burn pit. According to Blom, Katie had asked him several times to let her go, but she did not struggle with him until he began choking her. Blom stated that he managed to kill Katie with his bare hands, but his recollection of the events was unclear and contradictory. Blom's account of burning Katie's remains was not believable. He claimed that he had burned her body to ashes using only wood and paper, but this was not possible. When questioned further, Blom admitted that he didn't know why he had made this claim, as it didn't make sense to him. After the interview, Blom contacted 2 local TV stations to report his confession and asked them to leave his family alone. As part of his plea deal, his wife was returned several confiscated items, including a parcel of land, a home, and the family car. However, Blom's confession caused significant distress for the Poirier family, who had been holding on to hope that Katie was still alive. Blom later recanted his confession, stating that it was false and made under duress. He claimed that the isolation of solitary confinement and the medication he was taking had caused him to hallucinate, leading him to tell the authorities what he thought they wanted to hear. A plea bargain was no longer an option, and both the prosecution and defense teams were getting ready for trial. It's not uncommon for people to falsely confess to a crime, and this can happen in a few ways. One type of false confession occurs when someone gives in to pressure from the police or interrogation and admits to a crime they didn't commit. Another type of false confession can occur when people are led to believe by the police that they have committed a crime, even if they didn't, and eventually they start to believe it themselves. Blom's trial began in June 2000 with a 5-week jury selection. The trial itself lasted another 5 weeks with numerous witnesses, including several crucial ones. Assistant Prosecutor Thomas Perler presented the case, and Blom's brother was an initial witness. He testified that he gave Blom a New York Yankees jersey, contradicting Blom's earlier claim that he never owned such a jersey, raising questions about potential perjury. More testimony came from two women who had been kidnapped by Blom in 1983. They bravely testified about the harm he had inflicted upon them, providing the jury with a first-hand account of Blom's capabilities. Notably, the women's appearances at the time of the kidnapping bore a resemblance to Katie's. Forensic experts specializing in dental evidence analyzed the partial tooth and confirmed that it matched Katie's age, gender, in dental records. Dr. Ann Norlander, who had initially been uncertain whether the object was even a tooth, testified that the tooth belonged to Katie. The defense called its first witness on August 7th. Amy Blom, Blom's wife, testified that her husband was at home the night Katie disappeared. From the stand, Amy explained that she inferred her husband's whereabouts after seeing a news broadcast about Katie's disappearance the next day. The location of the disappearance was near their country house on Moose Lake, 110 miles from their home. Given her husband's prior convictions, Amy assumed he would be a suspect, which is why she later recalled his exact location the night before. Blom arrived home at 9:30 p.m. to find his wife already in bed. The next morning, his spouse was still at home, having gotten up to start the day, and she had already made coffee. Blom's spouse also took the stand to testify about her experience with the police officers who had questioned her. She described how they had bullied her, implying that if she didn't answer their questions the way they wanted her to, they would take her children away. She further stated that the officers called her a liar. Additionally, when asked about a baseball jersey, she denied having seen her husband wear one or receiving one from her son-in-law among the clothes he had given them. As she gave her testimony, Blom became visibly emotional, crying and wiping away tears. On August 10th, Blom testified in his own defense. Under oath, he denied kidnapping Katie Poirier. During his 3-hour testimony, he alternated between speaking and crying, claiming his life was in shambles and that he was ill at the time of the crime. Blom admitted to the investigation that he had committed the crime, but later recanted his confession. He tried to gain sympathy from the jury by portraying himself as the victim, claiming he was under distress due to media pressure and his wife's threat to leave him. Blom changed his alibi, now stating that he was not at Moose Lake on the night of the crime. Instead, he claimed he was asleep at home with his wife, as she had previously stated. He admitted to being at Moose Lake earlier that evening, but claimed to have returned home by 10 p.m. before Katie's disappearance. Appearing in court ultimately had no benefit for Donald Blom. Many perceived him as someone trying to dodge responsibility for his actions once again. At the conclusion of the questioning, Blom expressed frustration and made a last-ditch request to the judge, but it was denied. The case was then presented to the jury. Following a lengthy 10-hour deliberation, which included a 3-hour review of the recorded confessions, the jury found Donald Blom guilty of the crime. He received a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole.